Teddy told me that in Greek, nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone.
I want to talk about Final Fantasy IX. It's become a bit of an obsession for me over the years, and the more I engage with it, the less satisfied I am with how we talk about it and the place that it's ended up in the culture. Frankly, I've grown frustrated waiting for someone to talk about it in a way that brings me peace, which is a weird thing to say about a critically lauded game in one of the longest running and most popular game franchises, one that's sold millions of copies to an audience of fans that seem at least as ardent as me. But that makes it worse. For all that recognition, I still feel like there's so much not being said. I've stewed in this long enough. I've decided it's up to me to soothe my own itch. So here is where I'm going to quarantine the years of restless discourse that has rolled around in my head. However long it takes, I need to get this out of me. And through that process, I found even more things to love about the game, about the genre that it perfectly embodies, how it uses the strength of its format to achieve more than any of its peers. And I found myself tracing cracks that became fissures that swallowed up the goodwill towards the genre in the eyes of so many for so long that we don't even know what we lost. Final Fantasy IX is a genre-defining example of traditional JRPGs. It is a deeply meaningful work of art. It's the peak of an era. It's a long receipt of discarded lessons and ignored potential. It's about the importance of memory and the fear of death. It's about reckoning with endings. It's about nostalgia. And the how of its what is more interesting than the what of most other games. When it came out, it slid under the door as an undisclosed eulogy to its own era of the franchise. In trying to pick apart what made it so special, to explain my decades-long fascination with it, I found something in me that had attached itself to it. Underneath that frustrated itch was a bruise. I started this expecting to praise every pixel of Final Fantasy IX, everything it was trying to do and did so well, and to scold the voices that had contributed to the disregard of its design. And yeah, I am gonna do that. But at the end of all this, I found myself someplace I didn't expect to. A place that tempered me and treated the bruise and not the itch. Final Fantasy IX is my favorite game, and it's the best Final Fantasy game. And it might just be the best game ever. Final Fantasy IX was released on July 7th, 2000 in Japan and November 14th that same year in North America. It was developed by Square. It was preceded by 8 other numbered games in the Final Fantasy franchise in the 12 years prior, and sequeled by 7 more in the 25 years after. In January of 2000, Square announced 3 games in the Final Fantasy series at one conference: Final Fantasy IX, 10, and 11. Something of a flex of their own strength as a company and brand at the time, but also a declaration of the peak of the Japanese style of RPGs that had flourished in that generation, specifically on the PlayStation. Of the 3 announced that day, 9 would be the last of the series on that console, concluding a 3-game run that started with Final Fantasy VII, far and away the most successful game the company had ever produced. After that explosion of popularity, developers across the industry had leaped into the fray to try to recapture some of that lightning, including Square. And while they maintained their newly won reputation as the mainstream face of JRPGs, especially outside Japan, touting production values no other studio could match, not even they could duplicate the commercial and cultural success of 7. Still, business was strong, and Square was looking to the future. From the ambitious slate of games announced at the Millennium event, Final Fantasy X would go on to be a new benchmark in its own right, riding the excitement around a new generation of console hardware to set a then record for the series and console RPGs in general. 9, on the other hand, stood in an awkward position, announced in conjunction with the future of the franchise, but clearly not the face of it. 10 would be out in a little over a year, and as a franchise that had become associated strongly with pushing the boundaries boundaries of visual fidelity and spectacle, you can imagine why its shadow would loom so large as to obscure Nine's less revelatory presence. From the moment of its reveal, Nine's role as a throwback for the series was apparent. It was part of the pitch. The Crystal Comes Back proclaims the back cover of the North American box art. Aesthetically, it evoked a style more familiar to the pre-Polygon era of the series, with even Six and its mecha soldiers and industrial post-war look seeming more technologically complex than Nine's simpler approach. Character designs are more cartoonish and exaggerated, eschewing the slender fashion model proportions of 8. Rich with detail, still pushing the capabilities of the aging console, but now decidedly looking backwards for inspiration. Here, at the end of a generation where the company had completely cemented its influence and power, Square peered briefly at the foundation of the legacy it had built its empire on as the train left the station. In 6 months, Final Fantasy IX would be released in Japan on the PlayStation, 3 months after the PlayStation 2 had launched. From the day it came out, it was already a game living in the past. Today, the Final Fantasy series exists in a more complicated tension with its legacy. Over the past quarter century since the Millennium announcements, the brand has come to mean a lot of different things. We've seen a handful of console generations come and go, and with them, trends in game design that brought new challenges and uncomfortable questions for the JRPG genre. It was only a few years after that announcement event that Square itself crashed from its string of wins to nearly lose it all on a bet making a movie bearing the Final Fantasy name, a movie that seems to hover in a constant state of being overrated and underrated for reasons I just refuse to understand. Not long after that, they merged with their de facto rival, Enix, putting the stewards of Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy under one roof. The franchise quickly became more spin-off than series. The exciting spaghetti-flinging days of the late 90s with all the manic creativity that would spawn unhinged experiments like Parasite Eve and Air Guys were phasing out. They had tasted their own blood, and now creativity meant, how many projects can we greenlight within the multimedia universe of Final Fantasy VII? Numbered entries bearing the name became more infrequent, with 5 whole years separating the 2 single-player releases of 10 and 12, 2001 and 2006 respectively, but only 3 years if we want to count the offshoot sequel 10-2 in 2003. And I think now we can say that we should, but let's be honest with our past selves, we did not back then. It's fine to admit that we still had some growing up to do. The cast of ladies dancing elaborate J-pop routines as a battle system where you swap different outfits via magical girl transformation sequences was going to be a hard sell to Western audiences back in the mid-2000s. At that point, gamers were fully embracing their greasy era. The culture could be described as learning how to be cool from quoting last year's issue of Maxim magazine. If that reference is too old for you, just keep it to yourself. Through all the turbulent years since, Final Fantasy has remained the flag-bearing franchise for the company. With that unenviable responsibility, it was the face of new technological advancements. It could never be allowed to live down the excitement people felt for those CGI cutscenes in 1997. Expectations with obvious implications on the design and ballooning budgets of high-definition game development. A problem not exclusive to them, and no one has really figured out how to solve it, except for Sonic, maybe? This overlapped with what I'll call a great shunning of the JRPG genre around that time. As development costs were skyrocketing, the Western appetite for those kind of games receded. Harsher reviews and a pervasive climate of ridicule settled in fast. The new common sense was that they were boring, effeminate, and weird. Yeah, just like me in high school. But they staggered on. Too big to fail or just coyote running from cliff to cliff. Between 2006 and 2024, the same number of years that the series had existed before then, there were 5 new mainline games. Excluding the one that's like an online multiplayer thing, that's just one game for every new console. Each one of those games is as indistinguishable in style, tone, and format from the others as you'd get from completely unique franchises. Each distant and different from the rest that they functionally serve as reintroductions. Not that the brand wasn't busy. In between those releases, there was a corporate conveyor belt of merchandisable content. And just in games, there were handheld spin-offs and direct-to-DVD sequels. And when they really needed to find a few more bucks in the couch cushions, there were always ports, mobile to PC ports, hideous ports, broken ports, probably some kind of felony ports. Final Fantasy VII has basically spun off into its own separate brand at this point. Today, the difference between the prominence of the Final Fantasy name and any other JRPG is wider than it has ever been, even more if you're comparing their budgets. Now, money spent isn't the same as money earned, but just in terms of revenue and recognition, no one else really compares. It's the biggest name in the room, synonymous with its category, massive in a way that's singular among its peers that have managed to survive this long. Dragon Quest, Persona, Tales, Ys. But it does lack one thing compared to those names it overshadows. I can't tell you what Final Fantasy means anymore. Is that such a bad thing? Maybe not. But when I look over at other franchises and companies, they might not be as ubiquitous, but they've nurtured a style and an identity in their games, like a craftsman hones a trade not just to improve it, but to sustain it, to preserve it. And when I think about the role that Final Fantasy had in defining what it meant to be a JRPG, I feel like we lost something by keeping it in name only. Disclaimer. When I played Final Fantasy IX for the first time in the year 2000, I was not really a gamer. I had not played all of the games that had inspired it or were meaningfully contemporaneous with its release. I didn't know about Final Fantasy VI, and was spared any confusion about the fact that it was still called Final Fantasy III in my country. I was aware of games as much as I was aware of cartoons, or dinosaurs, or Legos, or Neopets, as forms of entertainment, not as a hobby that I would attach myself to for the rest of my life and lead me to this. I can remember every video game I had played up to that point because it wasn't a lot of them. Snood, Oregon Trail, Super Maze Wars, Pac-Man, Mrs. Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Galaga, Missile Command, Breakout, Escape Velocity, Giza, Super Mario 64, Pokemon Red, Pokemon Yellow, Tetris, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, Super Mario Land, Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Star Wars Shadow of the Empire, Banjo-Kazooie, Star Soldier Vanishing Earth, Rayman, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy VIII. I had owned only a few of these games personally. My sister and I shared a Game Boy to play Pokemon. I got an N64 for Christmas, and I didn't know about any games to play for it that were not on the back of the box. If the winds of adolescent whims had blown a little harder in some other direction, I likely would have moved on to another shiny object and not built up a personality that pivoted around gaming. Instead, though, the winds blew towards Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy IX was the first Final Fantasy game I ever owned personally, and it was the first I ever saw to its conclusion. I was not a gamer when I bought it. Afterwards, I was gonna be one, whether I knew it or not. So that's why I think it's so great, right? I played it when my brain was smooth and nostalgia had driven me to rationalize all of my developmental experiences as more meaningful and interesting than they actually were. Sure, that's possible. In fact, it was that doubt that brought me back to play it so many times, and each time my appreciation grew. I saw parts of it that recolored my past experiences. Qualities that hadn't landed for me as a kid came into focus. The game I played as an adult was better, more complete. A thought started to fester in me that grew bolder each time I went back to 9. What if it's not just as good as I remember? What if it's not just better than I remember? What if it's actually the best example of the whole genre? This, the genre's peak, humbly overshadowed by the games before it and after, both too popular and not popular enough to stand out. So, of course, I couldn't stop there. It's a good game, sure, but does it really stack up against the rest of them? Who am I to say? I'd played fewer Final Fantasy games than I hadn't. Maybe Final Fantasy 13-2 is when the series peaked. It's not impossible, maybe, and there's a whole genre out there. Playing Legend of Dragoon as a teen is hardly credible qualifications to speak on what makes a JRPG good in current year. I needed to know more. So I played every single-player, mainline Final Fantasy game. Not just the ones I hadn't played. In the last few years, I've played all of them to the end. Because I decided they count and I was curious, I played 10-2 and 13-2 and Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13. I played dozens of other notable and odd JRPGs from across decades. Is The Last Story a JRPG? How else was I supposed to find out? You think I trust Reddit? I spent hundreds of hours with everything from Chrono Trigger to The Last Revenant, Valkyria Chronicles to Lost Odyssey to Octopath Traveler 2. I did not play Final Fantasy 14 because I do have have limits to how much I would degrade myself for this, and you can't convince me that's a JRPG. I did all of this rather than just lying about it because I wanted to be sure. And after a while, it sort of turned into a bit that I was playing on myself. Like, why not play more Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story instead of spending time with my children? All so I could confidently come to you and say, I've done the research. They really don't make them like they used to. Seeing the arc of the genre laid out like this, the brilliance of Nine's craft just got more apparent in comparison to every other game I played. It hid its brushstrokes so well that the results seemed matter of fact, almost obvious. Something like this should have been a blueprint, but instead its influence evaporated on contact. Seeing what came after, it seemed like we missed something essential in our rush to see more polygons. Not only that, but 9 is one of the most interesting examples of how they stopped making them like that, the way that they used to. Partly as the game that came out at the pivot point of a series that would go on to resemble a bloated whale washed up on the beach of AAA game development. But also because it's not really 9's fault, is it? We can't talk about its quality without first looking at the weird way that we talk about JRPGs, or rather, how we don't talk about them. Even the classics are covered in caveats. Why is this? What's going on with how we remember JRPGs? Something you tend to encounter when retrospecting on Japanese RPGs made in this window of time is an excessive and eager apologizing about their perceived datedness. Not exactly a rare framing when you're talking about games from a few generations past that you personally were around to see when they were new, but compared to other games in different genres that were establishing their own paradigms around the same time, there's an accepted line of defense for how those games played that seems to exclude titles made from the JRPG formula. Admissions of their obtuseness or punishing difficulty or other qualities that would later be honed and polished into their smoother, modern descendants also often come packaged with an affection for those parts. They see them for what they are, rather than just the fledgling missteps of a long, linear arc of progress. Games like Resident Evil, Metroid, Half-Life, Quake, Halo, Thief, Max Payne, they become sacred objects in the face of shifting trends. Their age fundamental to their virtue, and specifically, it's in how they play. You don't have to cast wider than a hairnet to catch some variation of a game being pitched as a retro-inspired spiritual successor, or a series going back to basics with their latest reboot. The sentiment that these old games got the recipe right is not an unpopular one, but the more common this take has become, the clearer it is which genre staples are venerated and which ones are swept aside. With JRPGs, even those held in the highest regard, you hear a lot of, yeah, the gameplay hasn't aged very well, but the story is great, a phrasing that haunts the genre to this day, with anything new needing to distinguish themselves from that cliche, strapping themselves with some flashy feature lest they be spoiled with comparisons to the past. Plays like a classic JRPG is rarely something you hear with positive connotations when referring to a major new release. Unlike the adoration for the way Resident Evil 2's 2019 remake felt like how you remembered the original being, or how every review for Doom 2016 could not restrain themselves from calling it a return to the fast action of 90s FPS design. You think they're going to try that with a JRPG? Sure, they'll toss some lower budget crumbs out for the freaks, but they weren't going to put this kind of battle system in Final Fantasy VII Remake. They'd throw you out a window at Square Enix if you suggested keeping the random battles. This preemptive defensiveness is even more apparent in re-releases of old games. If your game was lucky enough to have the status worthy of being granted a re-release on modern platforms, congratulations! Enjoy your compulsory suite of hacks sewn into its flesh. Speed it up, skip the battles, maximum stats. Once you pare away any need to engage with the battles, you stop needing to consider your resources. You don't need to think about your skills or equipment. You don't have any incentive to explore the world to find what rewards could be hidden there or find interesting challenges. You're now just walking to and from scenes to watch dialogue happen at you. You've stripped away almost all of the play from the game. The way the publishers of these games enthusiastically want to sell you effectively a commentary-free YouTube Let's Play of their legacy is a sickness. I can only see it as vandalism. A vandalism that cuts deeper than cheaply redone pixel art and ugly fonts. This isn't the equivalent of adding in an intentionally balanced easy mode. We've seen what designing these games to be easier looks like. Instead, they're conceding to a hostile contingent the idea that the way old JRPGs play is not an important part of their appeal, that those parts didn't age well, and it wouldn't do any harm to the whole to remove them. You can see how this connects to a differing sentiment around our nostalgia. Why do these other games have defenders of how they play differently than their modern counterparts, all while so many people, players and developers, have seemingly agreed that revisiting old JRPGs is best done without playing them? Obviously, I couldn't disagree with that more, and I think it bears a lot of the responsibility for the shortcomings I've seen troubling the modern iterations of the genre. When you see core components of the genre as problems to be solved without considering how they interact with the whole, things tip out of balance. The stories start to lose their resonance, the characters aren't quite as memorable. These worlds that once felt so alive turn dull. You felt it before, right? When something looks the part, but the feeling is wrong. It's in the way so many people choose to talk about these games as two segregated halves, narrative and play, as if one doesn't make the other what it is. It's something I think drives the difference in how they're treated in discussions of how they're not made like that anymore. How can you have reverence for an old game's design if you only really care about pieces? In this context, gameplay isn't something to be understood or engaged with as a part of the experience. It's something to be managed, minimized. Every point of friction becomes a target for the sandpaper to come down. Where other game genres have gone about returning to their pioneering past in order to recapture and preserve some crucial spark, JRPGs have been denying their origins their due. Their unique spark is treated as a stigma, suited only for indie throwbacks and ports. And it's not even that the genre is dead and buried, it's clearly not, by namesake at least. Or that it can't do anything right without recycling the past. It's not about old games good and new games bad. The problem I want to stress is that we lose something important about the art of their design when we blindly assume certain elements were mistakes that need improving, and that we have so much more to gain by looking at them with clear eyes, both for the new and for the old. Okay, but what is a JRPG? Japanese role-playing game? What does that even mean? If I'm gonna make all of these claims about the merits of the genre and what it means to be a good one of those, we should all know what it is we're talking about, right? And this is especially important because most of the definitions out there, well, they're just not very good. For analysis, I mean, they're mostly preoccupied with the surface, just a checklist of aesthetics and broad gameplay motifs. But I'm less concerned about whether you can heal yourself with potions or cast magic, or even if it's made in Japan. I'm interested in what kind of experience the game design is trying to create. To me, that's what genre exists to do. It's the meta layer that acts as a framing for how to engage with a work. So, to make my point and properly heap all my praise on Final Fantasy IX, I'm going to present my definition for what a JRPG means. Specifically, what I'm calling the traditional JRPG, TJRPG. Oh no, I hate that. I want to focus on design that can be traced back to the start, and draw a distinction between games that are building on those ideas and the ones that don't really. It's not so much about old versus new or even good versus bad, but I want to propose that a traditional JRPG was trying to create a certain kind of experience, the sort of thing that tends to get overlooked when we compare them just like products. Yeah, I know, this is a recklessly subjective thing to try. I'm no expert, but I have put in the work. I haven't finished every Dragon Quest game, but I did finish the best one. I've traced a long and wide road of different games with different claims to the term. I've read the books, I've seen the criticism. I've given it more thought than any amateur really probably should have. You might even say that I've wasted my life. But if you like these kind of games as much as I do, I think there's a good chance you'll resonate with some part of what I'm trying to say. First, a little history. The foundations of the genre, the who and the what and the where and the when, are all pretty well documented. I'll be brief now because I won't be later. Also because lots of other people have actually done the research, and I'll just be quoting them anyway. When we're talking about what people consider JRPGs, generally we can draw a line around 1987 as the beginnings, with the success of Dragon Quest and then Final Fantasy, both developed in Japan by their own companies and creators, spawning a steady stream of sequels. Those templates caught on with a whole field of imitators, iterators, and innovators. And those early games are an instructive place to return to beyond the historical novelty, because as we look at the arc of the genre's maturation, it's worth noting what pieces of the first model stuck around. Why were they so critical to what made these games fun? Going back, it's remarkable how much is already there, right from the start. Then over the next decade, expectations emerged that turned into tropes that became a pledge to the player that you're getting one of those. This is often the stuff that comes up when defining a JRPG, the superficial stuff, like the premise of a heroic fantasy adventure. Beginning in a fantasy world, you start your journey weak in power and influence in the midst of a greater conflict. Gradually, you explore the world and are joined by new allies and battle greater threats. Both the scale and the stakes expand as your party's lives become entwined with one another and the fate of the world, until you stand in opposition to the embodiment of evil in the world and defeat it. Or something like that. You're telling me people play these for the stories? The game part of them gets boiled down into a formula about that simple, though compared to some other genres, a big part of their appeal is just how much variety there can be. But still, play enough of them, and the shape of a similar loop is easy enough to spot. The two biggest segments of that loop are battling and story seeds. You battle to move the story along, you follow the story to have things to battle. Unlike other styles of RPG, the story tends to be largely fixed and out of the player's hands, whereas the battling is where things get dynamic and expressive. And the connective tissue holding it all together, exploration and management. You navigate around, interacting with the world and its characters, some variation of talking, taking, or touching. Or you're in a menu, managing. You manage your equipment, you manage your skills, you manage your resources. To be prepared for battling, to cross the threshold into, of course, more story. Battling consumes your resources, health, magic, items, but it also gets you experience and money. Money can be exchanged for goods and services, so you stock up, you fight more, you grow stronger. See story. Sometimes all you need to do to move the story is to explore, to talk to the right person, to find the right place, or to solve a simple puzzle. But there will eventually be a point where you're expected to win a fight or 20 to progress. If you find yourself in a loop like this, you may recognize the distinctive flavor of JRPG. And that's usually where the discussion ends, which, to me, sucks. It's pretty unsatisfying to think about a genre just in terms of parts and not the whole. As the genre expanded and new developers took a swing at it, things evolved. There's so much fluidity and creativity going on, we miss the composition by just focusing on a few similar ingredients. If you zoom out, there's a pattern emerging here. Not just recurring motifs and mechanics, but things that nearly every game of this type seem to agree are important. The qualities that actually make an identity. I want to diagnose the genre. At its core, I think it's built on these 5 key pillars, and when arranged deliberately together, they create the shape of a traditional JRPG. Number 1, the narrative. They are games with a focus on telling a story, one primarily authored by the game designer. Unlike many Western-styled RPGs, where there's an emphasis on the player and their choices, here you are being told a story that you are, at most, an actor in. 2, the world. They are games that are concerned with providing you an expansive, detailed world to explore. You'll visit new, unfamiliar lands, with the story giving you justification and direction to travel it and know it completely. 3, the battle systems. They are games that hinge your advancement on your stat progression, with combat as the canvas to play with those numbers and skills. Each game comes with its own interpretation of how you do battle, but your goal is always to grow in power. 4, the presentation. They are games that strive to distinguish themselves with their aesthetic identity, either in sight or sound. The way they riff on fantasy themes and drape themselves in a unique style is an important part of their pitch. And 5, the ensemble. They are games that center characters and their chemistry. The appeal of the party that you navigate through the narrative is critical to the game's appeal, as well as the strength of the genre as a whole. These parts are meant to build off of one another. The characters are good because the narrative gives purpose and structure to their arcs. The story is good because the ensemble is there to ground the stakes. The world contextualizes the narrative, and its design paces out progression and exploration. The combat system measures the curve of power through the story, and it conveys the distinct personalities of the ensemble. A unique presentation makes the exploration memorable and rewarding, and it sells those narrative beats, and on and on and on. As I said before, this design is not random. This is the shape the genre took because hundreds of artists over many years found these elements strengthened each other and served a common goal. Nothing is purely extraneous, like a significant strain of criticism suggests, which is obvious by how even simple changes to this equilibrium ripple out into very different experiences. Now, like any good rule, the exceptions are what prove it. I mean, if you played more than 2 yourself, you probably immediately came up with a counterexample. You don't have to dig deep, you'll hit something the second you stick a shovel in. Like, am I saying Persona games are not JRPGs? They don't take place in a vast fantasy world, it's more like actual contemporary Japan? And not even all of it, just like one town. Are they not traditional enough? The exceptions are interesting because of how intentional these variations feel in the context of genre. They're in dialogue with the form and our expectations from it. No two games will care about all of these pieces in the same way, in the same ratio, giving us these different interpretations, unique covers of the same melody that show what parts of the core idea resonated with them. Their experimentation proves how versatile the structure is, as secure in their flexibility as a skyscraper. And when you play them, you can still feel it. There's a reason why this and this and this are considered part of the same genre. They're using different ideas to get at a similar experience. A Persona game looks at the importance of the ensemble and says, we can do more with that, and turns those relationships into game systems. Instead of changing genres, their additions support the connections between those pillars. Building the relationships obviously invests you in the narrative, giving you direct access to the lives of a wide cast of characters. Those bonds have mechanical weight too, giving you different advantages in the fights ahead. And that smaller scale world is made richer by letting you see more of it and through their eyes as you build those relationships. Through this lens, you can look at any game in the genre, and I have, and get an idea of what their priorities are. Why, or why not, they feel like a JRPG at all. This is why I think those superficial elements get in the way of understanding what is actually happening. Turn-based battles, mini-games, melodramatic teenagers, this isn't a genre. The structure beneath is what's important, and what makes them great. Let's be clear though, a good formula itself doesn't make a great game. In fact, it's pretty hard to do. Finding a game that manages to draw on those 5 pillars and turn out something special isn't so common. It takes a lot of skill to make anything. It takes a lot of luck for it to be good. JRPGs are complicated games by design. To make all these pieces bolster and balance each other rather than diminishing them is difficult. I mean, most of them don't even manage it. So yeah, it's probably pretty hard. Even among the cherished canon of the genre, there's a lot of mixed results. Well-articulated characters with a story that just doesn't go anywhere. An excellent narrative with an underbaked ensemble. Vibrant art draped over a thin and empty world. Battle systems that suck. And if those weaknesses don't discourage you from falling in love with some intriguing rough edge that leaves a lasting scar on your taste, great! I don't want this to be about what makes art good or even worthwhile, but there is real and often unrecognized value in the archetype. And this one in particular, the roots of the JRPG run so deep and are so entangled with so many other kinds of games that grew up in their midst. Lessons pulled directly from their pages still show up everywhere to this day. It's part of why it feels like such a shame that they don't really get their dues. But if I want to change any hearts, I need more than theory. I need, like, a really good example. So obviously I think this game is a masterpiece. And I might end up convincing you of that too. So if you are sensitive to the idea of having the story of this game spoiled, go. Play it right now. Most of the re-releases are pretty good, and you probably won't notice any of the minor changes they made, so they won't make you mad. But I'm going to try to talk about this game in a pretty linear fashion. So as you watch this, listen to this, keep in mind I will be changing discs every once in a while. That's a pretty good place for you to leap off if you kind of don't want to know anymore. Beyond that, enjoy the ride. Our story is set in Gaia, a world that you could describe as Final Fantasy themed, a place of castles, kingdoms, magic, and monsters, and also just sort of like hamster people, hippo lads, where no one thinks it's strange that the Palace of Alexandria is built around a massive sword or that boats fly through the sky. The first thing we're shown is a woman and a small girl being tossed about in a terrible storm at sea, before cutting to a princess shaking herself back into the present. A dream, or a memory. We pull out of her room and take in a skyline of Alexandria, a grand city surrounded in a dense mist. One of the 4 kingdoms that coexist peacefully on this continent. Then, we open with a setup very familiar to the series, as you're dropped into the shoes of our protagonist in the middle of a mission. That mission, our group of miscellaneous miscreants, are part theater troupe and thieves, here putting on a rendition of the hit play I Want to Be Your Canary, staged as a distraction while Zidane sneaks in to kidnap the Princess Garnet. This sort of opening is a bit of a staple of Final Fantasy games. They love to kick things off with a heist, a doomed escape, a bombing mission, a critical battle, a student exam inside of a volcano with unspecified stakes and I think it's like a prerequisite or something. It's also a good way to just introduce our characters. At the moment, it's easiest to establish their motivation, their skills, their intra-group dynamics. But 9 also uses this setup to demonstrate an important choice for our framing as an ensemble story. Parallel, divergent character perspectives. As we're following Zidane and the Tantalus plot to kidnap the princess, we cut away as we're introduced to the black mage Vivi, waddling through the streets of Alexandria looking for his way into tonight's big play. Waylaid by a forged ticket, he, slave? Teams up with a boy named Puck to sneak into the venue. Next, we're introduced to 2 more primary members of the cast, based on our familiarity with the game's box art. Garnet, the target of the heist, and her officially devoted guard and captain of the Knights of Pluto, Adalbert Steiner. Loyal to Queen Braun and her daughter to the point of willful blindness, Steiner clanks comically around the castle, trying to ensure a rigorous security that our other perspective wants to crack into. The dramatic irony of this doubles over on itself as we're made aware of just how incompetent Steiner's Knights of Pluto behave. Even the unserious scheme of the Tantalus crew is somehow too adept for them to foil, on purpose at least. But the final layer of irony is, of course, that Garnet is planning her own egress from the castle and seizes the opportunity to conscript her would-be kidnappers into her plan. The execution of this is what finally cinches the 4 perspectives together, with Garnet and Zidane on the run, Steiner making chase, and Vivi accidentally caught in the mix. The opening act climaxes when the Queen blows up the escaping theater ship mid-flight, sending our inadvertent party crashing into the evil forest.
Hey, why do they call it that?
In every way that matters, Final Fantasy IX is a game defined by its characters. They are load-bearing to its whole appeal. I want to come back to that later, once we've met more of the cast, so put a pin in it. All the traditional JRPG pillars are present, but the characters are the investment this game is riding on. And it is an investment. JRPGs are often maligned for starting slow, for taking too long before they get good. And I won't claim that every story has the same caliber of writing and pacing as 9, but the underlying idea shared by the ones that work and the ones that don't is that relationships take time. The satisfaction comes from both the build-up and the payoff. To quote screenwriter Tony Gilroy, "You can't cash a check if you haven't put any money in the bank." And this opening is our first major deposit. The beginning of the game sets us up with the core 4 of our ensemble and the seed of their arcs. This combination of coincidence, misfortune, and disarray provides us a prime introduction to everyone's quirks and conflicts. We kick off the story at a moment when these characters need each other, but don't necessarily like each other, and special attention is given to how this reluctant party functions together, or doesn't. Zidane is a boy in a found family of thieves, but distinctly protagonist-coded, if not quite hero material yet. He's a bit of a slacker, a bit more of a flirt, unconcerned with authority of any stripe, driven by his own whimful compass of what's right and wrong. Garnet is a disillusioned princess. The mandatory prim demeanor that she's been raised with is clearly inhibiting her, striking out as she realizes all of the protections of royalty make it so that she can't actually help anyone that she cares about. Steiner is staunchly dedicated to his role, thoroughly convinced of the righteousness of his royal instruction. His orthodoxy puts him at odds with himself, trying to reconcile protecting the princess while she disobeys the crown he serves. Vivi is a boy of incredible inherent kindness, matched by his innate magical power. His life was much simpler before he got wrapped up in the escapades of the other three, as their journey reveals much darker things about his nature. Right from the jump, we're presented with a quintessential adventuring group: a thief, a healer, a mage, and a knight, modeled after the default you're presented with when you start up Final Fantasy I. Fighting with the foursome feels right, balanced, comfortable. Even with their allegiances ranging from brotherly to reluctant to hostile, it's a good time to teach you how to play this collection of classes together, since they're just as unfamiliar working together as you. Their roles in battle are a lot like their roles in the story. There's this unremarked on symmetry with the way the chemistry emerges in the party mechanically and narratively. Getting out of the forest, which involves escaping the wrath of an army of living plants before the whole place petrifies around them, is what locks our party into place. With no other choice than to continue on together, the kidnapping turned escape turned rescue is now an escort across the continent to the city of Lindblom. The first leg of our journey as a full party sends us through some icy caverns. And if that isn't enough, the Queen's clown minions, Zorn and Thorn, are hunting us too. They're using a trio of prototype mages to bring Garnet back to Alexandria. With a little luck, we fend one of them off and find our way to the small farming town of Dali. It's another step towards Lindblom, but things continue to wrinkle from here. Garnet needs to keep a low profile, so she decides on a new name that might draw less attention. Someone should have told her that Dagger is not exactly a discreet choice, but I'm not gonna dead name her, so it's Dagger from now on. Get it straight. None of this goes down easy for Steiner. He's been on our side for now as long as it means protecting Dagger, but he's constantly trying to steer her to return to Alexandria. Directly or duplicitously. Whatever gets her away from this oaf, this no good, this monkey man. Once we've rested in town, everyone's off doing their own thing. So you take Zidane and roam around. Chat up the locals, shop for supplies, and gradually uncover the dark secrets that are literally beneath the surface, underneath it. It's just a great first impression of the JRPG town, and what a treat of thoughtful game design they are. In JRPGs, the town is a snack-sized slice featuring everything good about their narrative design and mechanics packed into a simple, inhabitable space. Each one is a unique, leisurely, interactive episode where you hang out with your characters, characterizing them as you go. In classic JRPG fashion, the story here unfolds as you explore, looking for odd nooks in between your errands, stocking up on gear and potion. 9 stands out in a crowd of its peers because of how well it understands the fundamentals. It's about building a sense of connection between your characters and the places they go. And it knows to do that by letting you play a part in forging that connection. 9 is committed to pushing its cast into the spotlight whenever possible, where some other games might not have room or time or budget or personality to give the party a presence in the world. It's a key part of 9's storytelling. Usually your party merges into the body of the protagonist, and the idea is, just believe me, they're also here. My party is just out of frame, laughing too. Sometimes you'll get that snake trail thing that is somehow more silly looking than absorbing them into my body, in 3D at least. Look at them go! 9 wants you to see these people, know what they get up to when you're not running the show. When you hang out in a town, you all really hang out, and the effect that it has on the tangibility of the characters and these places is huge, but felt softly. I'm reminded of how Final Fantasy VII would do this, most notably in Costa del Sol, the inconsequential seaside resort town that you can leave the second after you arrive. But it sticks in a lot of people's memories because they scattered party members around that weren't actively in your lineup for you to run into. When 7 did it, it was more for the gag of it. 9 takes the prompt a bit more seriously and wants you to know what makes Steiner, Vivi, and Dagger real. In this first town and many that follow it, everyone has something to do that matters. They're people, active agents of their own stories, and so they're treated like their stories matter just as much. So much that they added a feature to the game to have more ways to peer into the lives of others. Active time events, or ATE, are scenes that will trigger, sometimes optionally, sometimes not, when you're exploring the world, creating a brief cutaway to check in on someone else where the player-controlled character isn't. Dagger tries to pick up some local vernacular. Steiner buffoonishly fishes for information. Vivi just gets abducted off the street. This idea isn't entirely unprecedented among JRPGs, but 9's use use of it is easily its best showing. With the continuous shifting and dividing of your party throughout much of this game, it helps give all of the parallel pieces a sense of weight and shared importance. It can lay out the plot when it needs to as easily as it can share some incidental digression with a side character you haven't thought about in hours. It adds texture and changes the way you relate to the story. The game is regularly reminding you of the world beyond your view, that it still moves when you aren't there, and not everyone's priorities align with yours. Everyone is an individual, not just an appendage of the protagonist's story. It's a simple and vital addition that makes 9 so memorable. While we're still in Dali, though, there's a mystery to solve. We do eventually find Vivi and figure out why he was nabbed. These farmers are covertly manufacturing an army of mindless black mages for Alexandria, dolls animated from the dangerous mist that covers the continent. Vivi is unnerved by seeing people like himself animated and shipped as cargo, part livestock and part weapon. Dagger, meanwhile, struggles to understand her mother's part in this, but the implications are clear. Steiner, though, is on his own quest, bullishly trying to undermine our attempts to get back to Limblum. Despite his efforts and clanking, we steal away onto a cargo ship as it takes off from Dali. Aboard, Vivi finds more robotic, unresponsive mages. The party fights off the last of the waltzes. Zidane and Steiner nearly come to blows over where Dagger should go, but for the first time since the night of her escape, the choice is put in her hands, as Zidane trusts her to fly where she really wants to go. And so, ticket or no ticket, we slip through the south gate and on towards Limblum Castle. By this point in the game, we've made our way through a couple of dangerous areas, explored a town, and fought a handful of bosses. 9 has introduced more or less all the meaningful gameplay ideas they've added to the base formula. Things like the ability system, where you learn different traits from your equipment, letting you amass a deck of different buffs to mix and match. Also, during battle, your characters can go into a trance state, where after you tank enough damage to fill up a bar, you're supercharged for a few turns, unlocking unique, special skills. This is explained narratively as a power that is unleashed under the pressure of needing to protect someone you care about. But since you can't really control when it pops off, what's usually happening is I'm raging out at some squirrel that picked the wrong day to do that last 20 damage to me. Like most Final Fantasy games up to this point, the play tends to be pretty straightforward and accessible. You won't need to spend much time in the manual or waiting 20 hours for the full scope of the mechanics to be drip-fed to you through tutorials. Like its classic fantasy setting, 9's greatest strength is in its execution, not its novelty. But that doesn't mean there aren't still surprises under the surface. And with another delicious CGI cutscene, we're introduced to our second fantasy city. This one arranged in a giant, industrialized megastructure that encloses all of the districts inside of it. With the inciting objective resolved, the party naturally just dissolves, each roaming about the city on their own. The abduction is over. Zidane, the local, returns to his old haunts. Steiner gawks at the skyline and antagonizes random strangers. Vivi pokes around and finds Nut! And Dagger seeks an audience with the Regent Cid, an old acquaintance, hoping he can help her get to the bottom of her mother's sudden heel turn. But the Queen isn't the only royal who's been experiencing some changes. The Regent has been turned into a nasty little buggy boy. Thankfully, this is not a kink. Thankfully, this doesn't impair him too much. He's still got a big mustache and can speak and do regenty things. Turns out all the responsibilities of the rich and powerful could be performed just as well by an insect, just like in real life. Overall, things seem to be winding down. In a bar, Zidane runs into an old friend, Freya, a Burmesian and a dragon knight. She tolerates Zidane's shtick, but clearly has a lot on her mind. She's been searching the whole continent for her old flame, Fratley, with no luck in the years since his sudden disappearance. As everyone's figuring out what to do with themselves without the catalyst of an adventure, we even have time to compete in the city's annual Festival of the Hunt. If you play things just so and find all the right monsters to fight just before the time runs out, you can make it so that Zidane loses to Freya so you get the coral ring instead of the cash prize, obviously. In the midst of our celebrations, we're suddenly interrupted as a wounded Burmesian soldier stumbles into the royal chambers to spend his dying breath to call for Lindblum's aid. Their city is being attacked by an army of black mages. Dagger and Zidane immediately know what's going down. Queen Braun is going on the offensive. And so, we have our next call to action. Knowing her home is under attack, Freya is immediately settled to leave ASAP. Dagger, too, is desperate to question her mother, but everyone shuts her down, citing danger, war, death, higher-level monsters, 4-character party limit. And so, rather than be locked away in a different castle treated as an object to be protected, she takes matters into her own hands. After sneakily drugging the lot of them with weed, it's called sleeping weed, she asks Zidane for some to help her sleep. I don't know if that's legal in Limblum or if Zidane just has the hookup, Shout out to Weed helping you sleep. She absconds to confront her mother along with the one guy she can reliably boss around. When the rest of the party awakens, Dagger's gone, and their best guess is she might be headed towards Bermesia too. Now with doubled urgency and a new team composition, it's time to leave Lindblum and return to the great outdoors. First stop on the path is Gizmaluk's Grotto, passage through the mountain between you and Bermesia. That is, if you're not taking this opportunity to soak in the freedom of all this expanse and the soothing overworld theme. Up to this point, the handrails have been pretty high up, mostly confining you to towns and straight-line dungeons while you're served up the next fistful of story. Now, there's nothing between you and your next objective if you know which way to walk, but the curious are rewarded with a broader experience, and a more generous one. See, the party just lost its healer and its knight, breaking apart the golden configuration of the RPG battle lineup. In trade, the lance-wielding Freya joins you, but she's not a direct replacement for either. All this makes the attrition of combat much more noticeable, with the stress of random encounters wearing you down with each step. This word, attrition, is a crucial piece of the traditional JRPG design loop that often gets glazed over. It might be the most consequential shift between the traditional model and what came after. For what it's worth, 9 was the last time the series aimed to make that a core challenge for the player. Like the games before it, here you have finite resources to get you from point A to point B, and along the way, those resources are whittled away in fights. When you start your journey, you don't know exactly how difficult the fights are going to be, only that they'll be harder than the ones you fought before. You don't know how long it'll take to get where you're going either. So with that in mind, the loop goes like this. Spend all the money you have on new weapons, equipment, and healing items, and hope you have enough to get to the next place you can restock. And if you find yourself unsure or unable to go further, double back to your previous shop and spend your battle-earned gold on potions. You probably gained a level or two, and armed with the mental map of your last attempt, you push on. It's a loop that can feel punishing if you're used to constant forward momentum, automatic checkpoints, or fast traveling. You don't get anything for free here. All of your progression will cost you resources, and you have to prepare for that intentionally, which is basically true of most kinds of games, but the difference is felt in how wide that circumference is, and how many opportunities you're given to make mistakes that send you back to try again. Just looking at the early days of the Final Fantasy series, you can watch this concept evolve. In the beginning, confronting you with winding maze-like dungeons that are designed to intentionally complicate your ability to navigate them in a single go. You were supposed to explore and retreat from those dungeons repeatedly until you had mapped it out, plundered the treasure, and defeated the boss. They're filled with dead ends, traps, and increasingly deadly monsters on every floor. These early dungeons were built around the challenge of seeing how far you can get with just the limited resources you can carry. And they expected you to know or learn when to flee back to town so you can bank your gained levels and gold for your next better attempt. With every sequel, this formula became less restrictive. The focus turned away from this explicit repetition, especially once the narrative presentation of the games became the signature draw for the series. By the time you get to the PlayStation 1 generation of games, the convoluted dungeons had been largely replaced with themed set pieces that you could reasonably power through on your first or second try, with only endgame or optional content holding your feet to the fire. If you want to measure this evolution for yourself, just compare how often and where save points are placed in the series. It really wouldn't be that unfair to say that these 3D games were a large enough shift from those earlier dungeon-driven ones that they don't really count as traditional, but compared to where things went from here, they're a lot more iterative than divergent. The core premise is still here, just the scale of the loop has shrunk. With 9, it's been refined to be so smooth and accommodating that it's hard to imagine a way to polish it further without just making it into something else entirely, which is exactly what happened with the next game in the series. In 10, we see how making even small changes to the shape of this loop has cascading impacts on every other part of the design. Changes that aren't inherently good or bad, but it's another sign of discarding traditional JRPG design in favor of something different. 10 wanted to make a game about walking straight in one direction. It's a fine idea, conceptually ambitious even. But when you do that, you make a game where the answers to your problems are almost always in front of you. And that is such a fundamental difference from what came before. Every Final Fantasy that went for this, like 13 and 16, wants you living in the moment, solving whatever problem is in front of you with what you have on you. The loop is a line, there's nothing behind you. With 10, checkpoints automatically heal you. With 13, the battles automatically heal you. The message is clear. Do not look back. Games like 9 are okay letting you fail, to not be ready enough to go on. Because being ready is what the game is about. The solution to your problem is behind you, in the world. It's not about getting good, it's about knowing good. It wants you to feel pressure. Pressure is what makes games fun. Your skill is being tested, but not like in an action game where it's all about reflexes. You need to manage a constantly dwindling pool of resources, optimize your battle strategies. You can't just dodge and parry, so the longer you're exposed, the more you lose. You have to play characters close to their strengths, learn enemy weaknesses, and maximize your damage. Balance hurting and healing. It's testing your foresight, which makes it satisfying when your plan comes together. You get to the end of the dungeon and beat the boss. You're rewarded not just for the choices you made in one single fight. It rewards every choice you made in every fight and menu and item shop on the way there. Not just for playing one character well, but understanding how to play a handful of different characters well together, and delaying the consequences of your choices until you've executed it all with the dangling threat of failure always there means no step along the way is completely pointless. This is actually why I think random battles are kind of brilliant design. Okay, I know how that sounds. I know how insane I sound, and you've already stopped watching the video. Honestly, great idea. But even if you're not willing to go with me that far, I still might be able to convince you that there's more depth to them than most people give them credit for. To make my case, let's look at two common alternatives to random battles. First, making the monsters visible in the world so you can avoid them, and second, just scripting each fight into the world. And while neither of these are wrong, I kind of have issues with both that I think randomness solves better. Yeah, I know. You thought this take couldn't get any hotter. I'm sweating, seriously. First, I think that when you give the player the ability to avoid battles, they're gonna try to do that. And it's a lot trickier then to balance the fights they can't avoid with such a wide variable of how much experience they'll have gained on the way there. So maybe you set the difficulty somewhere average, like you might have if the battles were unavoidable. But now you've got a sizable group of players who are coming in severely underleveled, not fun underleveled, because they opted not to battle enough. And look where you've backed yourself into, requiring those players to just grind out those levels in a dull block of repetition, highlighting how pointless it was to let you avoid them in the first place. So, just script the fights instead. This, at first, does seem like a big brain move, right? But let's set aside the monumental task of balancing out that kind of experience curve across a 40 to 60 hour game, along with crafting enough variety of encounters to spread throughout every area across the whole world. Just assume you can do that. Now, throw in the fact the player might not have bought every weapon, learned every ability, found every treasure. Maybe they swapped in one of their party members who's 5 levels weaker than everyone else. Pretty quickly, every problem you tried to solve by scripting the fights actually requires you to script the rest of it too. Then you might as well just make an action game. One thing the randomness provides is a bit of forgiveness for both the player and the designer. For the game to work, you do have to fight. You need the practice as much as you need the experience, but having it be different every time allows for the feeling of opportunity that scripting lacks. Maybe this time around you don't run into that one group that wrecked you the last go round, and you get a little further on good luck instead. Treating every encounter like a gauntlet to test the player's skill is a fine design goal to have if you want it, but it's also not really the vibe we're here for. You know, save something for the endgame, okay? And now it's in the player's hands to turn the difficulty down when it's needed, rather than letting them accidentally make it much harder. For skilled players, they'll end up in a minimum of battles while still actively playing the game. You end up with a smoother curve without needing to hold the player's hand through it. And the only thing you need to put up with is... Okay, yeah, I do get why people don't like them. They can be a bit clunky and artificial. Sometimes you just want to go back somewhere and you wish you could just walk there without... And there's a special layer of hell if you make me solve a puzzle while also... And like with any system that requires the design to balance so many things at once, they end up as the roughest edge in an unpolished product. Hence, their lousy reputation, the whipping boy for the game's deeper issues. It's harder to identify the discrete mathematical flaws that make a JRPG feel like a drag to play, and tedious random battles are more likely to stand out as what soured your time, even if they're more symptom than sickness. Now, if you still don't think random battles are cool after that, you probably have a less grating personality than I do. But they make a lot of sense when you consider how they fit into the game design goals of a traditional JRPG. They're not just an arbitrary choice that is hung around out of a lack of imagination. These elements have been fusing together for years, shifting in unison as the formula is tested and tweaked. It's not so easy to just remove them. I'm still mad about those cheat modes. Max stats, 9999 damage, no random battles, 3 times speed. It's not just because I think these games shouldn't have any means of lowering the standard difficulty for players. I am not a get-goodist. I am in favor of games as a conversation between the designer and the player, that we should approach them curiously rather than as something that should only conform to our expectations. That there are many valid and interesting experiences a game can give us through its design, including ones we don't want to have. And I don't like the idea of shutting that down because I didn't come willing to listen and engage with what it's doing. There are lots of ways of making it so that the experience can be felt by a broader spectrum of people. Difficulty modes and accessibility functions are absolutely a part of a game's design, but this isn't that. This is subjugation. It's nihilism. Frankly, one of my favorite parts of JRPG design is that they built a way to tune it right into the game from the very beginning. If you're having a hard time with any fights in the game, just fight more. You can make yourself stronger very easily at any point in the game, leaving the exact degree of ease up to the player to decide for themselves, and in a way that doesn't just turn the game into effectively all cutscenes, no commentary playthrough parts 1 through 44, draining it of any value as a game. These hacks unmake the game. We understand that the RPG mechanics are designed how they are to give meaning to the fights, and the fights are meant to give meaning to the dungeons, which give meaning to traversing the world, which gives meaning to unraveling the story, which gives meaning to the characters, and back, across, and through. It falls apart once you just delete a pillar of its construction without replacing it with a different experience. These games are not fun with these hacks turned on. They are so much more of a slog than if you just play through the game as it was released. Each new area is just a brief, frictionless tube to scrounge through before triggering the next cutscene. All of this elaborate art and music whips by like scenery out of your window, leaving no impression. Not just because it was brief, but because nothing happened there. Battles are actually boring because no decision you make in them actually matters more than any other. Even the story, the only part of the game you're actually left with, feels really weirdly paced without any exploration or fights to slow you down between each twist and revelation. If you want to make an old JRPG more accommodating of present-day audiences' expectations, there are definitely ways to do that, but this is not it. The only thing that the blunt, destructive disregard of these modes does for me is to prove plainly how interconnected and interdependent the design of these games are. So really, if you're at all interested in checking out this game and other JRPGs from this era, I want to warn people away from using these hacks. I know they're always there, tempting you a button press away. I, too, am often lured by invitations to skip things, to rush through an experience I'm not even sure I'm going to enjoy. Maybe you're watching this video at 1.5 to 2 times speed, something I'm sure most people in my life wish they could do when I start talking. I'm not trying to gatekeep this. The opposite. I want more people to give themselves a chance to enjoy playing JRPGs. The game loop for 9 is not an especially punishing version of the traditional Final Fantasy experience, but its goals are clearly of the same stuff. It wants exploring a wide open map to pose as much risk as it does opportunity, for you to feel responsible for your successes and failures, for you to feel the pressure of dwindling resources as you search for the next shore of safety. And under this pressure, looking around for any advantage, you might stop by the obvious landmark near where you began, the Q's Marsh, and find some aid. This aid takes the form of Quina, a hapless frog-munching gourmand with a hunger problem. They take a liking to Zidane the instant he snags them a snack, and after being berated by the local chef, decides to join us purely for the international munchies. Either way, 3 becomes 4, and the odds of survival gently tip in your favor. Like Freya, what Quina adds to the combat mix is unique to what you've had before. They're a blue mage, not the most reliable attacker, but instead learns skills by chowing down on the weakened enemies. It's better if you don't think about it, unless you're into that kind of thing. Oh no, please no. This isn't the only advantage advantage there is to find out in the plains near here. There's also a forest where you can befriend a chocobo and begin a longer chain of treasure hunting side quests, the rewards of which throughout the rest of the game regularly give you an edge over the standard array. So the lesson impresses itself as the funnel widens. The easiest path to success isn't the most straightforward. You're expected, though never outright required, to explore and engage with the world around you to overcome the challenges along the central path. Not grinding, a repetitive, mindless exercise. It's variety that prepares you and makes you stronger. Once you feel ready, it's on through the grotto, a sacred hall for the Burmesian people, where we find more evidence of Alexandrian forces. It's a massacre. The work of black mages and the queen's awful clowns. After we fight on through to the other side of the range, we head into Burmesia itself. Though as we make our way across the plains, you'll probably catch sight of a mile-high swirling sandstorm off in the west, but that's not important now. In the midst of this A-plot, we're also given a glimpse into Dagger and Steiner's side of things. Her goal is actually to return to Alexandria, hoping she'll find some answers there. Of course, Steiner is pleased about their direction, putting this lapse of judgment behind them and back to saner ground. Dagger, though, is in her feelings. She resents being boxed in by Zidane and the rest, and is intent on finding a solution to this her own way. But she can't easily dismiss everything she's seen of her mother's warmongering. Their route is long and takes them over the mountains by train, still laying low until they get back to the castle. Back in the city of Constant Rain, it's just as the dying soldier described. Braun's army of mages has devastated everything you can see. Like the grotto, we're only in time for the quiet aftermath of the slaughter. We navigate through the city, finding a few friends and foes, as Freya presses on to find out what happened to her king. Hope dwindles, and it's at the ruined palace that they find Braun and her general Beatrix. And one other, a mysterious man named Kuja. He's given off big anime villain energy. This is the kind of euphoric gender expression that your soft child brain will latch onto and chase for the rest of your life. Why did no one tell me that you could just do that? Braun praises him for producing the mages she's used to rampage the city. They revel for a bit, but the Burmesian king has escaped to Clara, that sandy vortex we saw before. That's their next target. Despite thinking better of facing off against them like this, we see a lone Burmesian soldier charge in, forcing our hand. Unfortunately, Beatrix is stone cold with a harrowing battle theme, and the party isn't much better suited to take this fight. Survive long enough to bore her, and she cuts everyone down to a sliver, before hurrying off to prepare an assault on Clara. As they all lay defeated in the pooling rain, Kuja steps to the ensemble and takes notice of Zidane for a moment. Then he dramatically mounts a silver-feathered dragon and rides off into the sky. The first chapter has established our core cast, and now we can start to toy with the formula. The party has been forcefully divided, both physically and philosophically. It'll be a long time, and there'll be different people before they reunite. Absence does, in fact, make the heart grow fonder of having a dedicated healer in the party, which is why I'm lingering here in the details. Like the towns, the character tropes. The story of the game exists in its design, and its design is in its story. Maybe the way I'm telling it doesn't seem like all that. It's a bit thin, a bit obvious. And sure, in its presentation, 9 draws heavily from its own past for source material, which puts it comfortably in the space of classic fantasy stories, princesses, scoundrels, mages, magic, sorcerers, swords, whatever. Not unlike treating gameplay tropes as a scapegoat for a mediocre experience, story tropes tend to get the same reaction from people. They gain a reputation of a sign of a lack of quality or creativity when it's not the trope's fault the story is bad. Whether it's game design or narrative design, we shouldn't be so quick to mistake the mold for the message. Final Fantasy IX is definitely a conventional JRPG, plenty formulaic in a lot of ways, but it is one that was honed by the best artists in their field, operating at the peak of their power and influence, executed with the utmost confidence into the aspirational ideal of itself. And crucially, it's using these conventions, themes, and symbols to say something. Disc 2 starts us off back in Dagger's shoes, leaving the fate of the rest in limbo for now. We check in with Steiner, nursing his doubts and convincing himself to stay resolute in his loyalties. On their way, they run into a couple of Tantalus members, Marcus and Cinna, off on a mission of their own. Both of their roads lead to Alexandria by way of Treno, a city immersed in endless night. And so, Marcus tags along as a temporary escort. In Treno, Dagger finds an old scholarly friend who happily guides them to an underground network of tunnels that lead to Alexandria. Like a fantasy rail system mounted on gargantuan ants. Gargants. Cute. But as soon as the three arrive, they're quickly ensnared by those fucking clowns again, who don't really care what Dagger and Steiner have to say. The queen has other plans for her daughter. Back now with Zidane and the others, they pick themselves up and race off to Clara. The city is perched atop this massive tree, protected by a swirling sandstorm. And once we make it inside, we see refugees from Burmecia mixed among the other natives. They're all traumatized. Having faced the other black mages, some see Vivi as a monster in their midst. The Clarans assure us this place is safe, though we know it's coming. It's not long until misfortune strikes. In a moment, the spell holding up the sandstorm is shattered, inciting an all-out assault from Alexandrian forces. Soldiers climb up from the roots while mages are teleported down from an airship directly into the city. The violence before we'd only caught in the aftermath now takes place all around us. We fight back the waves as we try to protect the defenseless, ushering them into a cathedral at the top of the city. Outnumbered, we're suddenly rescued by Fratley, the Dragon Knight from Freya's past who had disappeared years ago. While his presence is some relief, it comes with more bitter and sweet. His memories seem incomplete, with no recollection of Freya or their love, only a vague sense of duty to his people. Freya laughs through tears. After so much loss, it's just one more thing snatched away from her. The moment is interrupted by the forces amassing at the doors of the cathedral. Beatrix is back. We square off against her again and, no contest. She crushes us again and takes what she came for, the Claren's sacred jewel, before signaling withdrawal from the city. In a hasty, desperate move, our party hijacks a couple of telepods as the black mages return to the Queen's airship above. The battle is over, but Braun has one last move. From her airship, she summons the Eidolon Odin, who, in an instant of unprecedented violence, destroys Clara down to the roots. Zidane, Freya, and Vivi emerge safe on board the Red Rose, but Freya is inconsolable. Another part of her reduced to ash. Did anyone else escape in time? Hiding aboard the ship, we overhear Beatrix and Braun talking. The high of victory quickly fades for the Queen as she turns to her next target. There's more power to be obtained. First, from her daughter. The princess must have her eidolons extracted. Then, off with her head. Beatrix, already shaken by the brazen and excessive force she just witnessed, only grows more wary of her queen's motives. Her loyalty tilts on the edge of a knife, but our party needs to act now, jumping back into the teleporters to hopefully reach and rescue Dagger before Braun pulls into the driveway. And it's just our luck that Steiner and Marcus escape their confinement just as our party materializes onto the scene. The clock is literally ticking. There's no time to lose. Just 1 sec. I'll be right there. Oh, hold on. Okay, yep, nope, yep, oh, yes, alright, okay. Now put Zorn and Thorn in the trash and get Dagger back to safety. While she was captured, those freaks performed a ritual to extract all of her Eidolon powers, which we've never actually been powerful enough to wield at this point, but the process of extraction has nearly killed her. We carry her fragile body up from the depths of the castle just in time to run to Braun and her posse. And of course we get bodied by Beatrix one more time before she sees the truth of the Queen's callousness. Sure would have been nice if she noticed Dagger dying on the chaise lounge before cracking a clim hazard on me for the third time, but Steiner too can't ignore the facts of Braun's actions. His whole life has been serve the Queen, protect the princess. But now he's seen enough of the world to decide for himself who deserves his loyalty. The both of them finally break their fealty to follow their own conscience. Now Freya and the two turned knights hold the line as Zidane, Vivi, and Dagger flee from the castle through the tunnels. But the escape via Gargant is sent off course, and instead of Lindblum, we find ourselves crashed out in Pinnacle Rocks. We're given a brief glimpse into the Queen's schemes. Frustrated by Dagger slipping through her fingers again, she's decided to hire out for this one. Two bounty hunters, the axe-wielding Glani and the stoic Amarant, are brought in to finish the deal. This time it's on site for the princess. All she wants is the jewel she wears around her neck, and bonus points for killing the defective mage. Before we can mourn the magical surgery done on Dagger, we're already making a pact with the Eidolon who lives around the swamp. Okay, whatever, it's fine. I guess you're a summoner again, for real this time. Welcome to the DPS, Dagger. No time to think about that though. As soon as we step outside, we are smacked with another travesty. In the distance, we see the Red Roses leading an assault on Limblum, blowing the city apart with mages and soldiers. This time, Braun doesn't even wait for a full retreat before summoning an Eidolon to cripple any resistance Limblum had left in it. Zidane, Dagger, and Vivi find their way into the city, navigating the wreckage to find Regent Cid. The place is under Alexandrian occupation now, but despite surrendering to their forces, he knows something has to be done to stop the Queen's conquest. She's already seized or destroyed every major kingdom on the Mist Continent. Even if there was a force capable of fighting back, we need to cut off the source of all this violence. Kuja supplies her with her mages and her magic. He would just turn his weapons over to another if left alone. And Dagger still has hope that her mother could be returned to reason, that her madness is also Kuja's doing. He's the target. Problem is, no one really knows shit about that enigmatic twink. There's a rumor he comes from outside the Mist Continent, the outer continent. Nice. How do we get there? Another tunnel, of course. Our crew finds the entrance to the tunnel in the depths of Q's Marsh. All paths lead to Quina eventually. And it's nice to have a fourth on our side before the long journey to the outer continent. Before we get that far though, Lonnie tracks us down and tries to collect. Unfortunately for her, she vastly overestimates her 1v4 abilities. I guess Beatrix made it look easy. She dips out, promising to get us next time. All that's left for us is the long, dank, dark mine before we emerge into the bright, mistless plains of the outer continent. The map expands again, permanently broadening the scope of the world. It's a moment that feels big. It's been feeling big since 1987. We love to get to a place on a map we haven't been able to get to. Delayed exploration is a core piece of the appeal of JRPG world design. The postponing pleasure, knowing when to keep the door locked and when to open it. These were tenets of JRPG design since the very beginning. The way the world feels to explore and inhabit is as important to the genre as all the battling. These are the two main things you'll be doing in these games. Fighting, exploring, fighting, exploring, fighting, exploring. You fight to explore, you explore to fight. Each leans on the other so much that if you take one away, it basically stops being a JRPG. No matter how much management and story you pump into it. Yeah, that's right. I'm saying Vagrant Story, not a JRPG. And when I say they don't make them like they used to, it's here things have gotten the most dire. The traditional JRPG world design has virtually disappeared from the mainstream, and with it, so went a Fort Knox fortune of value it brought to the genre that is not easily replaced. The point of this design is for you to build a relationship with the world. It wants to do more than funnel you towards content. It should feel like someplace, like a place. The blueprint for all this really goes back to the origins of the genre, and further still if you're looking for other inspirations. A framework so sturdy, it's kept mostly intact all through to 9. Haters might see that as a lack of innovation, a stagnating genre. I see it as a really well-made house. I admire its longevity. What they do change is all in the details of their craft, the cleverness and nuance of all the ways they work to impress this feeling on you. It's an illusion made up of 1,000 thoughtful touches that ricochet into thousands more sensations, so many, so diverse and flush with the rest of the game experience that you don't even bother counting them. It's how every save point in the game is a little guy that has a name and talks to you and gives you mail to give to other save points. Hey, why are you reading that? It's how early in the game you meet this town mayor who shoos you away from a room with a clearly visible chest in it. The most classic of JRPG teases. You can't get in there now or multiple times later, but after dozens of hours, you could recognize him yelling at someone else in Alexandria, which is your cue to remember that now no one is guarding that chest. It's how different cultures and nationalities are clearly present in the NPC designs. It's how a hunting festival will take place in the same city streets of Limblum that you explored on your own, rewarding your familiarity if you bothered to get some. It's how you return to that city again hours later and find it destroyed, littered with unremarked changes like a small nest that now only holds a lonely egg. Or how you see a massive tornado of sand you visited once turn into a blackened hole in the ground that stains the world map forever. over. It's the small stuff that gets me. I'm easy, okay? You don't have to do much to manipulate my emotions. Just make the NPC running the shop be disappointed if you don't buy anything. And I will buy something out of obligation from every shop I find out of fear of disappointing them. The world is speckled with clusters of unique places, all with their own purpose and personality. The narrative makes a point of sending you most everywhere, but not everywhere, at least once. And then it sends you back there later. And maybe this time it's different somehow. You remember it how it was before, like you do in a real place. Maybe the game doesn't tell you to go back, but you do anyway just to visit, or because you like the music. Every town you go to is a chance for characterization and relaxation. You get to see what your party gets up to and how they choose to spend their time, how they interact with locals. When people complain about the lack of towns in modern JRPGs, this deficit is what they're noticing, even if they don't have the words for it. It's a place designed for leisure, to feel like a break from the attrition and productivity of the world outside. That's why the shops and the inns are spread out and tucked away in different spots. The town narrativizes all these management mechanics for you. It's inefficient on purpose. They're not designed this way because the technology was too primitive for anything more streamlined. They want you to take in your surroundings. It's not slow, it's chill. If all you wanted was speed and efficiency, you'd condense all these game systems into menus and abstract them from any semblance of place. With 13, they wanted so badly to be a smooth, fast-paced action game that its places were hardly more than wallpaper, with no state of being that isn't pushing forward. The treasures you find are just obligatory orbs tucked in unremarkable corners of otherwise linear roads. And I can give them credit for seeing how antithetical a town would be to that kind of game, but they forfeited all the characterization these spaces add, ending up with a game with barely two memorable places to rub together. And if you don't let me roleplay going on this adventure, it's going to be a lot harder for me to care about your characters and your story. The journey makes the adventure. If you leave out all the things that would make it memorable, then what good is your destination? And it's not just towns, it's the rest of it too. Where did all the level design go? So many of these places barely exist as a game. Just dollops of content served up without any need to engage with the world around me. What is there for me to relate to in picking a location in a menu interface before appearing in the next combat gauntlet I need to consume in order to watch a cutscene to explain what it means? Is the loading screen supposed to feel like a journey? Maybe just explain the story there too. 9 and other traditional JRPGs don't exactly have the most complex level design. On paper, they might seem as linear as anything out of a modern JRPG, but taken holistically, they were trying to make their worlds into something that you played. World design is also level design. It's game design. It wants to create an experience by asking you to engage with it on those terms. You're tasked with navigating and remembering, with rewards for both. There are vestiges of this idea lingering in modern games, but since no other part of their game design supports them, they're never engaging. The go where they don't want you to go get item thing, yeah, that's just a phantom of what we used to have. It's not about getting an item for walking 6 feet to the right instead of the left. It's about understanding the space you're in until you can read a room like a dowsing rod. It's about risk and reward, tasking you with managing your resources well enough to both find the loot and get through to the end. Turns out, when you make a game that's only part JRPG, it's pretty hard to make those parts any fun. This is the long way to say JRPGs have more interesting worlds when they happen to have interesting places where meaningful things happen. And when exploring that world is something that involves thought and preparation. These are places that you need to seek out, walk to them on a map, discover them through interaction. The world has a natural flow to it, interrelating places you visited and creating new frontiers to cross. Frontiers and barriers, promising more before it finally lets you have it. This sensation of seeing the lock, whether it's rivers you can't cross, mountains you can't traverse, oceans you can't sail through, sets an expectation in your mind of more. An expectation that enriches the satisfaction each time a threshold is passed and the world becomes bigger. It all ties together with the rest of the JRPG pillars. The narrative stakes get higher along with the expanded scale of your exploration, and it maps onto the upward curve of your party's power. As you get stronger, the world gets larger. More than just the monsters you fight, it's your power over the world itself. Gradually, you'll have all the tools to go anywhere you want with no barrier high enough to contain you. By the end game, you can look back over everything you've seen, remember everything you've done, and feel the change. It's such a loss when this is missing in more modern JRPGs, when there's no way to take in the scope of your adventure. All of the streamlining stripped away your relationship to the world, and with it, all of these other connections are cut off. You can place the player in a tube, bashing through a series of challenges one after another. Your level goes up, as does your foes, but without the ability to go back and see the things you've outgrown, do you actually feel stronger? The numbers are bigger, but has anything actually changed? The quintessential JRPG experience is expressed through its world, growing yourself from one small town to the entire planet, which adds to the sense of excitement when you end up someplace where everything is new. The lands here are scarce of the kind of civilization that the Mist Continent is full of. The nearest we can find is a village of extremely Scottish dwarves. They're not the most helpful bunch, not having any tips for tracking down Kuja, but we do find a black mage shopping. The mage rushes out at the sight of us, which is suspiciously self-conscious of him. Outside of Vivi, the only thing we've ever seen them do is nap standing up and burn people alive. No one told me they got social anxiety. The dwarves tell us of a nearby forest these atypical pointy hats come from. We go there, solve an avian riddle. Does this count as a riddle? And uncover, beyond a veil of magic, an entire hidden community of black mages. They're people, just like Vivi. They all live here, trying to build a life for themselves away from their warmongering makers. They raise chocobos, they run shops, and sometimes they stop moving. Here in this oasis, face to face with the first beings in the world who don't just look like him, but act and talk like him, Vivi's shown what his future holds. The truth is, he was made to be disposable, designed with a brief window of life just like every other mage. Most only get a couple of years, and Vivi is already well past that. No one can say exactly how long he has left, but long isn't likely. He's finally found a place where he belongs, and with it he's given answers no one is prepared to hear. Dagger tries to console him, but what can you say? Zidane sympathizes. For a long time he's been trying to find where he belongs. That night, Vivi leaves his bed to stand among the graves of the other mages and stares up at the sky. Vivi isn't everyone's favorite character just because he's got mascot levels of cute. He's also the heart of the story's most intimate themes about what it means to live. His struggles with the indifference of life, his creation, and death are the heaviest and most human piece of the narrative, and he carries them openly and honestly, but with poignant innocence. These aren't questions anyone here can answer for him. But we do get another lead on Kuja, along with more reasons to hate the guy. We're told to look for a place beyond the mountains, a sanctuary. We run into a young girl with a horn, a Moogle named Mog, and a lot of attitude. This is Aiko, another of the main cast. She takes a liking to Zidane and convinces us to follow her to her home nearby. Once we get her in a fight and see that she can summon Eidolons just like Dagger, the anomaly of her magnifies. Turns out, she's a child of the Summoner's tribe, the last one of her kind. Her home is the ruined village of Madain Sari, where she's lived alone for years, save for a flock of Moogles to keep her company. We learn more about the history of the Summoners and what this might mean for Dagger's own foggy past. She doesn't have a Summoner's horn, but she does have these powers that seem to be the envy of Braun and Kuja. Among other people, for the first time in years, Aiko is a bramble of energy and has zero filter. She hits on Zidane, who does the correct thing and does not acknowledge it. She's jealous of Dagger. She pokes fun at Vivi. She also knows about the Ifa tree. For those of you who have like a passing familiarity with Japanese pronunciation, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it? It's a massive, ancient thing wrapped in roots the width of roads. Mist pours out from within, and as they advance down to the heart of it, it begins to resemble some kind of organic machine. In its depths, they encounter a being called Soul Cage. It's part of the tree, in league with Kuja, stationed here to create mist through the harvesting of souls that flow through the Ifa tree. This byproduct breeds monsters, sows chaos, and is the material Kuja uses for crafting black mages. Killing it means stopping the production of mist for good and ill. No more black mages. It's a fight with heavy consequences, somewhat undercut by how you can just end it by casting life on him. It's JRPG undead enemy rules. With Soul Cage gone, the mist begins to clear. The engine has been shut off. And if that won't get Kuja's attention, nothing will. But as we wait, an urgent Moogle message draws us back to Madain Sari. A bounty hunter has stolen something precious of Aiko's. It's Lonnie again, back for more mischief. She's after the jewel Dagger carries, and the similar one that Aiko keeps here too. Her theft is interrupted by the other bounty hunter, Amaranth. He doesn't like Lonnie playing dirty. He scares her off so he can fight Zidane one-on-one, which should probably be harder, but Zidane is the better bandit. He does the whole finish me routine because of his inscrutable rogue honor code thing. Zidane is more of the aw shucks variety, so if you take a knee in battle, he'll just let you off easy. Things finally settle down, and our cast has a moment to reflect on where they've been and what they need to do. Aiko is at a crossroads. Should she stay in Madain Sari as she was raised to, or follow her new friends on their adventure? Despite her bratty demeanor, she's a deeply lonely kid, and this companionship is what she really needs. Zidane finds Dagger down by the docks, mulling over her feelings of powerlessness. Nothing has gone right for her. So many people have gotten hurt. She still just wants to find a way to bring her mother back. There's a quiet moment where Zidane gets out of his own way and comforts her, just before a flood of memories overwhelm Dagger. A burning village, a boat, a terrible storm. In her past, she was here, escaping as a huge eye in the sky destroyed the village. She was a child, and her actual mother died rescuing her from a massacre. It's a hazy thread to her past, but for Aiko, it means that Dagger's the closest thing to a family she's had in ages. As the party assembles to head to the tree to finish what they started, Aiko resolves to leave with them, bringing Mog with her, at least. But why settle for one character when you can have two? Amaranth, still sore from his dishonorable dismissal, emerges to whinge some more. To this, Zidane, ever the optimistic protagonist, simply invites him along. That brings us to the magic number 8, if we assume Freya and Steiner are alive somewhere. The full ensemble has been collected with half the game left to go. So now it's time to take a look at what we pinned back there at the start. Let's talk about the ensemble. It's the keystone of the JRPG. No other part has as much influence on how it feels. Just going on how people talk about their favorite games, it's most of what people come to the genre looking for. And without some gesture towards a party with memorable personalities and relationships, it just doesn't hit the same. Scale back your world, diminish your story, streamline your battle system. It's fine, passable, but take out the ensemble, and you might just be playing a different game. How you feel about the party can make or break your experience. Try going on a camping trip with 8 other people you don't like. In a genre that thrives on hangoutability, you want to spend time with them. There's no rush to move the story along. You're bringing the story with you everywhere you go. It's in the quiet space between action and adventure where you appreciate the sense of place, where you reflect on what it means to the characters. They are your multi-faced avatar, the way you interact with the game and the way the game interacts with you. They are not optimized for action and momentum. They're designed to mosey. If every part of a game's design works to teach you something about it, then the JRPG ensemble is saying, hey, what's the rush? Why don't you chill with your friends for a bit? I think 9 shines in everything the genre tries to do, but what sets it above the rest is how it understands how important the characters are, showing what you can do narratively and mechanically with an old formula and trained hands. Let's get anatomical. I'm really gonna dissect this concept for a bit. Both because it's interesting how differently JRPGs are able to draw on their characters compared to other kinds of games, but also because there's a lot of seemingly small differences within the genre that shift the results pretty dramatically. We can divide an ensemble's qualities into presentation and play, not so much separate as mutually fulfilling, yin to yang. Presentation is descriptive. How do they look? What are their personalities? What motivates them? Who are they to the world and to each other? Play is the mechanical, either in combat, traversal, in puzzles. What is the player able to do through them? Every game has its own approach to these, and if we wanted to express these differences, maybe as some kind of spectrum, it might look something like this. The key differences being whether the player or the game is making the choices, with presentation and play on their own axis. For fun and context, we can plot the mainline Final Fantasy games on this chart. Great! Now, at a glance, we can see most of these games try to keep the presentation of the characters under the game's control. They tend to come pre-baked with their own names, stories, and looks. Interesting to note that the biggest outlier in the series is the very first game. Makes you wonder, is Final Fantasy I even a JRPG? The variety
is in the play. Sometimes excessively customizable for the player. Others only allow a little flexibility. Do not ask me how I measured the exact placement of each. I've been replaying these games for the past year, and it would take me twice that long to explain it. The place that 9 occupies, this right here, is the sweet spot for JRPG ensembles. Whew. I wanted to avoid talking about the differences as good or bad because it's not that simple. But if you care about JRPGs, you care about their characters. And if you care about the characters, this is how you get the most out of them. In games over here, where the player decides the play for the party but not the presentation, it just doesn't work for me. Hot take time, if the game controls the character story while you pick how they play with neither affecting the other, then why are there characters at all? Why is it a game? You're watching a movie while you play with action figures. This isn't even about dissonance, ludonarrative, or otherwise. A JRPG ensemble is more than an interesting presentation. It's game design. Remember, these are long games, dozens of hours running around with your party outside of any scripted scenes. You're exploring on your own, getting into countless random battles. So it matters that all that time contributes something to their characterization, that you feel their personality in how they play. If I recommend a game based on the strength of its characters, but they functionally vanish as soon as I have control over them, I'm just wasting your time. There are YouTube videos for that. But, what do you really gain? Well, for one, that great story the game is telling can matter outside of cutscenes. Having symmetry between the roles of gameplay and narrative means there can be tangible feedback as changes in one affect the other. Not just the possibility, but an incentive to draw the two together. Every twist in the story is an opportunity to introduce some novelty, some twist in the mechanics. One of the most effective and direct ways to go about it is just messing with the party lineup, a move that 9 is so fond of that it doesn't stop running until basically the last act of the game. Sometimes just as a brief punctuation, creating a gap where you can focus on the strengths or weaknesses of a different pairing, or something more dramatic like going without a healer for so long that the eventual resolution has as much catharsis for you as it does for them. Tying the character's gameplay to their narrative means that removing verbs like healing or fire damage from your toolkit is not just about you missing an ability, you're missing a person. When everyone is functionally interchangeable, the story can't carry the same consequences. The party is just your equipment, your resources. All the drama and bluster of the script is locked behind a sheet of glass. Pretty to look at, but still separate. For example, I've always felt that in 7, it would have been a much bigger deal when if those abilities weren't just materia I could immediately swap out to literally any other party member. Maybe I should cut that part out. Is the Disc 1 Final Fantasy VII spoiler more taboo now that Rebirth is out, or is it less? Man, that game is really... And because these are games, that characterization doesn't just happen in the story. It's something that you feel through interactivity. What verbs you're given that you're limited to, that's your experience of the story as much as the script. Done right, those verbs will drift you into a role player's mindset. Paired with the presentation, the buildup of animations, sound cues, the visual chemistry, it all gently coerces you towards playing each close to their type, to what feels true for them. And because in 9, each character is unique in presentation and play, so is your relationship to them. All their different utilities and tricks provide friction and texture that you don't get without a prescribed playstyle. Zidane is rarely out of the party, so he's designed to be a good complement for anyone. His traits as a thief, reliable damage, and high speed means you're able to keep playing offense and laying down damage. But as a thief, shouldn't you also be stealing when you get the chance and give yourself an upper hand later? Garnet starts off as your healer, not able to win a fight on her own, but essential to the longevity of your whole team. You might take it for granted, but when she's absent from the lineup, you really feel it. Then the story goes on and she grows in both strength and confidence. Her versatility makes it clear she's not just there to be defended. Vivi is a glass armory. He's the backbone of your offense, with the massive damage that multi-targeting elemental damage can give you. But he's too fragile to stand up to much on his own, so you end up feeling highly protective of him and also reliant on his power. The sharpest thing about Steiner is his sword. He's the toughest, tankiest fighter of your bunch, so you tend to play him with a straightforwardness that matches his personality, but still, his connection to Vivi is stitched into their mechanics. With both of them in the party, he can imbue his strike with magic. Despite all his obstinance and bluster, he's a team player at heart. Should I keep going? I'm gonna keep going. Quina is appropriately weird to play. They're mechanically unpredictable, their standard attacks doing literally randomized damage, but as a blue mage, their skills are what you make them, developing as they experience more of the world. So when this hungry gourmand is in your party, you often find yourself thinking, hey, can I eat that? I wonder if it tastes good. Freya is a Dragoon Knight, and so has a practiced technicality to her playstyle. Her skills encourage you to be thinking a few turns ahead, balancing equal parts lethal damage and buffing your team. Patient and sophisticated, not the kind of character you should mindlessly spam attacks with. Aiko at first seems like a clone of Dagger's class, the first redundant character in the ensemble. Her parallels as a summoner and a white mage have a lot of narrative significance, but she also quickly differentiates herself with a more offensive playstyle, in kind with her punkish personality. Then Amaranth shares the most in common with Zidane, as another roguish character of a similar background. And if there was a version of 9 where I was allowed to take Zidane out of the party, I'm sure I would use him more. Still, his skills feel aggressive and scrappy, giving you lots of ways to get the upper hand. But 9 always goes a mile further. This isn't just about individuals, it's called an ensemble. The same mechanics that convey their identity can also create inter-party relationships. Stuff like Aiko and Dagger being similar classes, giving them things to bond over and things to compete over. Like her knowing the more powerful healing magic before you're likely to makes her quickly seem more impressive than she lets on. Steiner admires Vivi with such devoted, chivalrous passion that him being the only one that adopts a unique skill when paired with a specific party member is very fitting. Vivi literally makes him a better person. I love them. Quina does not think about anything other than food, and therefore has no real chemistry with anyone, but also no problems with anyone. Okay, that one is a bit of a stretch. Some characters just feel right in a team together. By the time you're closing in on the endgame, you'll probably have your own take on the canonical lineup. And all of that is reinforced by 9's dedication to filling out the cast with unique and believable bonds between each other. Because if you're spending this much time together, going from smacking goblins to gods, it would make sense for them to, feel one way or another about their companions. And not just a few of the most important faces, all of them. Obviously, right? Well, you would be surprised how rare it is. It's more the norm for most of your party to only ever acknowledge the main protagonist for the majority of the game, with a few drops here and there to suggest what's not shown. Just about any competent JRPG is aware of the inherent appeal of mixing together eccentric and contrasting characters. These are games that are taking most of their cues from serialized anime and manga, so that's a given. It would take more creative effort to deviate from the norm than to serve up some photocopy of a cliche scrawled with, you get the idea. The eccentric old man type forms a fatherly attachment to the bubbly young girl. Loose cannon hero forms unlikely friendship with stoic but proficient swordsman. But more often than not, these relationships tend to act more as silos than a network. Character A may have an interesting link to character B, but I don't have a clue what either thinks about character C or D. It ends up feeling less like an ensemble and more of a caravan of side stories. And as enjoyable and memorable as some of these side stories can be, it doesn't really get all the way to filling the promise of a finely blended band of characters, does it? The JRPG fan can subsist on half measures. Believe me, I was there. I know what it's like to browse the local game store's stagnant collection for any cover that gave me even a whiff of made in Japan. Yes, dear listener, I played more than one dot hack game on the PS2, and I will not go back to check which. 9 understands the assignment, not just how to weave an ensemble together, but why it matters. Each comes into the story with their own motivations. They think they know who they are, what they're supposed to do, but through exposure, their purpose shifts from a certainty to a question. Chemistry or friction with the other characters is what locks them in and eventually leads them to some truth about themselves. Zidane and Steiner have the most hostile relationship in the cast. Everything about the other frustrates them, to the point where once they have the choice, they will not work together until they've both changed enough to find themselves truly aligned. Dagger and Vivi have a subtler connection, but also a more complicated one. They're both characters with a lot of power, but yet haven't learned how to wield it. When she looks at him, she thinks of the responsibility she has to fix the harm her mother has committed, But when Vivi looks at her, he sees her as the person she is and admires the strength she doesn't see in herself. Aiko and Amaranth are an unlikely pair of characters to have any relationship at all, a hardened thief turned bounty hunter and a sassy summoner child. But they're both stubborn people whose rough exterior is there to mask their vulnerabilities. So it's fitting that Aiko, this baby, is the best at poking through his manufactured attitude. 9 puts in an enormous amount of effort to make these characters feel like they know each other. And they're not static things either. Most of these relationships go on to shift significantly through the story. It's not afraid to have actual animosity and conflict in the core cast. It knows to treat those feelings with patience. Where many games would prefer to just get it out of the way by the time you team up, here, that's rarely the case. Some relationships get worse. Some take the length of the game to fully resolve. Some things can't be forgiven. Whatever the case, the variety and complexity of these relationships is something that impresses me every time I come back. Their writing and presentation props up every other meaningful part of the story, giving the whole thing the pathos needed to work. All good game design is a finely tuned machine. It's a lot easier just to pick out the parts we like and don't like. This could have been a lot simpler, though probably just as long if I just listed all of my favorite little details about 9. I think everyone would have liked that a lot more. But I wanted to make a bigger point about this genre, and all the complexity and strength that is often overlooked, to consider the whole machine. Just because it's old doesn't make it any worse than what we have now, and not every alteration has been an improvement. This is about more than one game or franchise. 9 just stands out as an especially good case study in those qualities, from the circumstances of its making to its place in the history of the series. It's a refinement of over a decade of experiences making JRPGs, tuned to perfection, presented so confidently that it gets taken as elementary. It's not simple, it's seamless. But that's not really why I felt so compelled to talk about it. If all I wanted to do was praise traditional JRPG design, I'd be talking about the genre more generically. No, this is about Final Fantasy IX specifically. This game has stuck to my insides and driven me to video essay madness. I keep coming back to it over the course of my life, over and over, trying to understand what made it stand out. And my relationship to it has changed as I changed. Eventually, I started to understand what it was really saying, the way that its message fits into the harmony of its design. That it's as much about celebrating this era of JRPGs as it is about why we can't go back. To explain, I need to talk about how this ends. So, where were we? We've got a 5-sim party heading back to the tree to wait for Kuja to show up. And I guess he's coming here because the mist stopped, but he doesn't really care about that because now he's ready to get promoted to main baddie. But that's only because he's actually waiting for Braun to show up. And she's only showing up because she's planning to double-cross him now because she thinks she doesn't need him anymore, which Kuja is also counting on anyway? Does that make sense? I mean, yeah, whatever, forget it. This is the end of the second disc of the game. We're racing towards the climax of the conflict. The Queen and Kuja are barreling towards a violent end, and we need to intervene by whatever means we can muster. We run around the Ifa tree and are prompted to rearrange our party multiple times. Who do I want to take with me to fight Kuja? Harbingers of a boss battle are all around us. Look, here are both of the lead villains of our story in one place. Braun even summons famous Final Fantasy dragon Bahamut to flex on Kuja. Surely here there'll be some culmination of the hours of continent-spanning adventure that led us all this way, and just nothing? You run back down the tree's roots and you smack some mist monsters, just faceless jobbers, for another dramatic reveal. Dagger beseeches the power of a dormant Eidolon to help her fend off Kuja and save her mother from certain death, and we're presented with another anticlimax. Whoops! Turns out a giant water serpent can't help her with her boat-bound mother. It doesn't so much crescendo as it sputters out. Wait. Hold on. Is this game not good? I wish I could say this is the only point in the game where you just have to roll with it, but
It's not. Story stuff, character stuff, mechanics.
Like, I don't really know what any of the crystals Braun is stealing are for. I don't think the game knows. It just kind of stops mattering after a certain point. No, I'm not gonna read the wiki. Another thing, trance is kind of bullshit. Every limit break mode in the Final Fantasy games has been bullshit, but this one comes off as particularly unflattering. Seriously, dropping a trance at the end of a random battle for no good is one thing, but it's also weirdly imbalanced. Some of these trances can change the tide of a boss fight, but some of them aren't going to change much, and Queenas have no use outside of random battles. Except the Earth Guardian boss. I know, shut up, it's not enough. Frankly, I think the design of trance would have benefited from being more random, or at least appearing that way to the player. For something explained to be tied to dramatic swells of emotion, it's done disservice by functionally just being a bar that slowly fills when you take damage. At least try to give it some mystique, I'm begging you. The font they used for the Pinnacle Rocks title card is just impact, and it looks weird. My god, they're still talking. Just let me play the game already. I've played this game all the way through like 15 times at this point, and even I had to double check on like half of the plot points involving Kuja's plans. It's not even that it doesn't make sense. It basically just goes from A to B to C when you lay it all out, but you spend a good 10 hours not really knowing what his goals are, so by the time you get to the end of the alphabet, you've probably just forgotten what most of the steps are, and half of them could have just been like anything else. There is no good reason why the arc summon animation is 108 seconds. I do not want to play red light, green light with a frog. This flash game. They should have let you do the 4 Guardian fights as all 4 teams. I mean, I get why they didn't, but after all that dramatic buildup, it's such a letdown for it just to be like a perfunctory boss fight. There's a bunch of underbaked mechanics and things that just don't work as intended. Like a handful of enemies constantly float you, which at some point was probably supposed to make you more vulnerable to wind elemental damage, but like it doesn't, and they still just do it anyway. Did they forget about Freya halfway through development? She's like the coolest goddamn character in the game, but for God's sake, her second to last skill is just a random die roll where half the results fuck you over. Being kind of like a weird, exaggerated Chinese stereotype. What's Japan's deal with black people? I mean, I guess this could have been like so much worse. No, you can't just grab someone's ass like that. You're not being a lovable rascal. You're gonna have a juvenile record. I don't like trashing something for its optional content, especially content designed for big-time gamer freaks who will wring out every drop from an experience long after the joy has faded and obligation has just taken over completely. But I also know that right next to this stuff that's a little mysterious or a little tedious, there's a fair amount of quests that are shrouded in obtuse guesswork intended to frustrate kids into buying a guide. And that just kind of sucks the fun out of it for me. The card game is dumb. I know Final Fantasy localizations have a long history of making Star Wars references, but the final boss introducing itself with anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering is just, you know what? Actually, no, this is good. This kind of stupid is cool, and I like it. Every time I come back to this point in the game, I feel a giant hole, poorly papered over. You don't actually do anything. Eventually, you just stop and watch the big battle play out in a CGI cutscene. And it's cool, sure. Kuja summons a familiar eye in the sky to take control of Bahamut from Braun, using the King of Dragons to wipe her and her fleet out in an instant. And I want to excuse it. Maybe this absence is intended to pull at your eagerness to fight and win, only for all your bluster to sizzle into nothing, robbed of even the opportunity to try. Instead, you watch as Dagger's mother is consumed in flames and washed up on the beach to spend her last moments by her daughter's side, pitifully apologizing for all she did. You were naive to think it didn't have to end this way, just like she was. Your self-importance got the better of you, and in the end, you were helpless to push against what was always going to happen. Isn't that a better story? More satisfying than the idea the developers were just crunching on both time and what they could even fit on the disc? This awkward series of story beats was just the result of the many cuts the game endured before it was sent out the door. Cuts that were likely necessary, as they often are in development. Compromises made so the thing could exist at all. But just because they were needed doesn't mean they suddenly become meaningful storytelling decisions. More often than not, ascribing intention to opaque, questionable decisions in commercial entertainment is just wishful thinking. The kind of wishful thinking that follows that because I love this thing, it has to be immune from critique. I want to say it's perfect, meaningful, profound, but it's not. It's just a game.
So, right, another thing I've heard a lot of people say about 9 is that the game is just kind of unoriginal and that it leans too much on callbacks to the franchise. And as an issue, it seems like a pretty pointed one. After all, Final Fantasy is a series known for reinventing itself with every new game, coming after 7 and 8, both showing the biggest departures from the established look of the franchise up to that point. An intentional throwback seems kind of unambitious. And like, we're not just talking about a handful of hidden Easter eggs here. 9 is dense with references. So much so that it would be a huge waste of your time if I were to just list the ones that I was able to catch. I did already waste my time writing them down, though, so...
And yeah, I would probably find this all kind of lame and hollow if that's all there was to it. That's not a very exciting choice, given all the things you could do with your game. But there's a lot more to Nine's references than winks to the audience and retreading old ideas. Something I can't say for certain other games in the series. We're so accustomed to seeing this use of brand iconography that as soon as we're shown something that we recognize, we tend to assume it's only there to gratify the fandom. Final Fantasy games do this a lot. With so many games and so many different styles, the various name drops and monster mascots have become sort of an obligatory feature. How else would you know it's a Final Fantasy game if there isn't a chocobo somewhere? Oh yeah, we got Moogles, and we made them extra fucked up this time for some reason. Airships, dude! It's Sid, and Sid, and Sid, and Sid, and Sid. You gotta have a flan in there. I'm pointing at my screen. Somebody please notice me pointing at my screen. Bomb, Bahamut, Behemoth. I was scared there weren't going to be crystals in this one, but we got them. Yo, is that Shiva? Yo, is that Shiva? Yo, is that Shiva? Yo, is that Shiva? The way Final Fantasy games tend to use their references now is like tossing out lines from Hamlet in the middle of like a blockbuster movie. 9 uses its references like they're actually putting on a Broadway theater production of Hamlet. They're not trying to get you to point at your screen. They're engaging you with the same kind of craft. And yes, it's not there for the fans. There is a clear intention to celebrate Final Fantasy's history. It can be that at the same time there's something deeper going on. For all the lengths I'll go to draw meaning out of seemingly innocuous parts of the game, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say the makers knew it was about memory. It's all over the damn place. They won't shut up about it. The game wants you to feel nostalgic. It's about nostalgia. It uses the presentation to put you in that state of mind, priming you to engage with the themes of the story. It's not exactly subtle, but I've also never really seen anyone else talking about it, whereas I've seen lots of people dismiss it as shallow fan service. So let's say it's subtle by gamer standards. It's a story about what we remember and why we remember. Memory as a concept shows up repeatedly. It's layered throughout the text, the subtext, and the metatext. All of these different perspectives providing texture and nuance. It's joy and it's pain. It's the things we wish we could remember and the things we're unable to forget. People who aren't like we remember and people who have forgotten us. From the very first image of the game, we're shown a memory. Not that we know it at the time, but Dagger's faded daydream is a glimpse of her past. A memory that's faint, but the indents of it still remain, like the melody she sings to herself. Zidane, too, has no memories of his home, finding whatever companionship he can with other vagrants while he searches for vague recollections of where he came from. Freya has to confront the tragedy of a memory that's lost. Her love forgets her, leaving her with just an unreciprocated past. Over and over, the idea of memory is invoked as a means of connection, the strands that hold us together and carry on people who are gone. Even when Braun dies, it's her memory that's carried on through Dagger. Not the villain she became, but the mother that Dagger loved and lost. With Vivi, we see the weight memories can carry in the value of life, confronting the brevity of his time among the memorial of other dead mages. There's a thread strung between the importance of memories and the finality of life. Maybe what makes them so vital is tied to our fear of death. And if I want to talk more about that, I should first explain where the story goes from here to where it ends. When you insert Disc 3, we're greeted with what feels like the longest stretch of chill, hangout-centric time we've had since we first visited Lindblom, but now with over twice the cast. So much has changed since we first left Alexandria, and we need to establish normal before we start breaking things again. We channel surf through the lives of our cast with a loose sitcomishness that really lets our feelings breathe and expand beyond the narrow demands of the plot. It's a showcase for all of the narrative flexibility that Nine's decentralized point of view adds. Dagger is wrestling with her status as de facto queen. Aiko wanders unsupervised through the halls of Alexandria Castle, insulting everyone. Please! The theater troupe tries to cheer up Zidane, who's stewing in his unexpressed yearning for Dagger. There's an adorably mishap-driven love letter story that exists entirely to let you unwind and just see the unexpected arrangements of people interacting without world-threatening stakes. It's so cute and goofy that an edgy gamer boy would cringe himself into knots. If you're not interested in these characters or this world, you wouldn't still be here. We haven't forgotten about Kuja, but the leads have all gone cold, so no reason we can't partake in a card game tournament. And just as things are starting to feel suspiciously like a filler episode, our villain saunters into Alexandria under the mask of night. With Bahamut under his control, he rains fire down on the city. Disaster pulls the slackened threads of our characters tight again. Everyone rushes in to help protect the city, but it's overwhelming. Swarms of monsters flood the street. The best we can do is buy time for people to evacuate. Strangely, with Alexandria in peril, a mysterious force calls to Dagger and Aiko both. They're guided towards the summit of the castle. A transformation is triggered, turning the palace into, I don't even know what to call this, a winged mecha cathedral the size of a city? Yeah, I guess that fits. Anyway, Bahamut is like a toy against this tremendous house, but Kuja's cool with it. Actually, I wanted this to happen. An even more powerful Eidolon to control? Time to bring back the eye in the sky. But wait, it's Disc 3 and we're due for a new villain reveal. Enter Garland. He's piloting the ship in the sky that Kuja's been wielding until now. This dark father muses about Kuja's failures. Such a disappointment. Did he think he could turn against his creator when his replacement is so close at hand? The shuffling of the bad guy hierarchy doesn't really do much for our side. Against the power of that airship, all we can do is flee as a beam from above reduces the castle to rubble and devastates the city. With every major nation on the continent crippled, there is no one who can mount a defense against Kuja now. We have to track him down and stop him for good. So we get ourselves a boat and sail in search of a plot. The world is cracked open a little wider again. More space, more agency, more options to explore. Where once a single continent felt like the whole world is the whole world now. It actually feels like you're searching for something when the whole globe is your haystack, when you can look in the wrong places, when you can track back to places you've been before for new clues, or you could find an old town with something special as a reward for your curiosity. Maybe you end up on an island with monsters too tough to handle and you say, not yet, but later. This chapter is all about widening your path and tasking your recollection of the world. Just don't take a break from the game for, say, like a few months, because when you get back, no one is going to remind you where you were supposed to be going. In the Black Mage Village, we find that most of them have left to join Kuja under the promise of him extending their lives. We've never seen Vivi so mad. Obviously, Kuja is just lying. They're just dolls to him. But sometimes a false hope is hope enough. We find Kuja's palace beneath some sand, but he captures us under the threat of, is that like a furnace or something? Maybe lava? Kuja conscripts Zidane and half the party to bring him something from Oilevert. It's basically a museum to a vacant civilization, filled with projections and recordings from the history of thousands of years. We learn some fragments of the connection between our world and Terra. While we're gone, the other half of our party breaks out and messes with Kuja's lamps. Then when Zidane makes it back from his errand, Kuja kidnaps Aiko and just escapes in the chaos. We race after him to Mount Gulag, tracing his steps into the heart of the volcano. There, Kuja is having Zorn and Thorn attempt another Eidolon extraction like they did to Dagger. Before we can reach them, Mog emerges to defend her, going into a trance state and revealing herself to be a guardian eidolon, and then we obliterate these actual clowns for good. Kuja takes this in and, constantly looking for greater power, concludes that this is the new shit. Trance, immense power, channeled through reaching a heightened emotional state. If you recall that explanation, remember? That's what this little bar filling up symbolizes. When I let loose on some random enemy, that's my heightened emotional state kicking in. This is my ultimate power. You wouldn't understand, Mom. Kuja, just talking to himself for a bit, decides that to achieve this power, of course, he needs to go there before whooshing off yet again. Following in Kuja's steps, we navigate to an inverted castle, where Amaret gets some much-needed character development. He's kind of like what Zidane would be like if Zidane never made any friends. So, it's kind of nice to see him and Zidane hash out this dichotomy between being solo and being part of a team. We also find out that there is Terra, a twin world somehow linked to Gaia, and the only way to follow Kuja there is to break the seals on 4 magic temples at the same time. The 8 members of our party split off into pairs, with no one explaining to Dagger and Aiko that putting 2 white mages together is like just a terrible team composition. 4 teams take out the 4 guardians and break the seal, letting us travel through the portal at the Shimmering Island to the unknown world of Terra. Here, we meet the genomes of Bran Ball, mostly vacant people who all look suspiciously like Zidane. After all this time searching, this is the home he never knew. Which makes sense if you figure, hey, I've been everywhere else at this point. This is the land of blue light from his memories. Unfortunately, this bummer of a homecoming only gets worse. Garland is here too, and he leads Zidane away from everyone for some heavy exposition. Zidane is, like all the people here, an artificial husk, tasked with maintaining a long dormant world while the old residents are in stasis. One day, these genomes might be vessels for the souls of Terrans, but not yet. Zidane has a special purpose, to eventually replace Kuja as a tool to bring more chaos and destruction to Gaia, to speed up their plan of assimilating the planet and its souls. Garland himself is just another custodian of Terra, set in place to do their work while their souls chill in the icebox. He used Kuja before, and now it's Zidane's turn. Zidane isn't having it, but Garland snaps his fingers and he collapses. Zidane up to this point has not exactly gotten a lot of what you normally call character development. Despite having the most screen time, being locked in your party nearly every scene he's present for, he's had less reason to be transformed by the story around him than the rest of the ensemble. He's got that affable protagonist role. The most he strayed away from the path was at the beginning of the game when he walks away from his family of fellow rascals to help Dagger. Otherwise, he's mostly just serving up a positive vibe with a veneer of nonchalance to aid everyone else's arcs. So it hits him pretty hard when he finds the answers to where he's from and what he's meant to do. His can-do attitude cracks apart. There's no home for him to belong. He was never meant to be anyone. He was always alone. When his friends find him, he's bitter, frustrated. He pushes everyone away, unable to reconcile his identity with the facts of his existence. Is he just an empty vessel? At the last moment, Dagger pulls him back and reminds him who he is to his friends. It's one of those, power of friendship type moments that these games are known for. And fuck, it works. They pull it off because, like everything else 9 does so well, they understand why moments like this can be effective. You push through a gauntlet of monsters with your friends coming to your aid, desperately trying to get you to understand how much you still matter to them. For you to believe in the drama, you need those relationships to feel weighty and genuine. And in every facet of its design, they put in the work to build those connections. This is what they're good at. This is the strength of the genre. This is why you make a game like this about its characters, so that some 30 hours later, they can cash this check. Or maybe it's the sick as fuck prog rock anthem that does it. I don't know. Now that the band's back together and all juiced up, it's time to go kick Garland's ass. Just after okay, I got it. Wait, no, what is that? What is this thing? What am I even supposed to be doing? Did we really need the worst elevator in the world and a teleporter puzzle? After we've been sufficiently delayed to create adequate dramatic pacing leading up to this confrontation, the boss fight turns into a full-on brawl with Kuja and his silver dragon dropping in to try to take us down. But we're still riding high from our friendship theme song earlier, so instead, Kuja takes enough hits to send him into his own trance. He's overflowing with excess power drawn directly from the soul-sucking blood-sucking ship he's been piloting all around Gaia. And with all that power, now he can rule over both worlds with no one left to control him. Boop. But Garland gets one last dig in. Kuja is not just an inferior genome to Zidane, he's also coming up on his expiration date. Another artificial being with a short shelf life. And all the power in the world and Gaia combined isn't enough to escape it. Bad news for an egomaniac. So, all that's left is to burn it all down. And you know, good for him, right? This is the protein, where all these different strands, these ruminations about power and death are drawn into a stark divide. Terra, the planet and its people, as the clearest expression of what it means to refuse to let things end. It's a colonizing civilization that perpetuates itself by feeding off the essence of other planets before absorbing them and replacing them. Instead of following the natural cycle of life and death, they'll dominate and steal whatever they need to go on forever. And to that end, they made Kuja a tool in their scheme of violent exploitation. They gave him a purpose, but denied him personhood. They sent him out to manipulate, to nurture the hunger for power in others, to feed the spoils of his warmongering upwards until they were ready to discard him. So, yeah, I'm certainly not going to feel bad when Kuja bites off his master's arm and burns down the house. No better place to point his pink laser beams than the heart of the machine of interplanetary genocide. And as we watch him wipe out this slumbering race of colonizers, we think, wow, girl boss. But Kuja can't accept a world where he doesn't exist. What drives him to slay his masters is just a reflection of their fear and their desperation. For all the fire of his vengeance, he's just replacing their collective cruelty with one petulant child. His crimes aren't really any different. He's a puppet who built his own puppets, using them as he was used, discarding them as he was discarded. Seeking the power to subvert your end, no matter your motivation, always leads to the domination of others. And all the profits of that violence funnel up to the top, exploiting exploiters down to the last piece of pain. Instead of following in that lineage like Kuja did, it's Vivi that finally breaks the chain. And in that contrast, we've reached the question the game has been laying down tracks to reach. What do you do when you're faced with your own mortality? Do you choose domination, rejection, oblivion? How do you live in spite of your helplessness, knowing the end is near? Will you be able to let go? In the fourth and final disc of the game, our cast has assembled into its truest formation. The strength of their bonds is mirrored by the stability of the party. This whole time, our party has split and splintered for dozens of different reasons. These fluctuations are gone. From here, our ensemble is under our control until the end of the story. Real love and friendship hold them together, replacing the coincidence and opportunism that was there before. Even Steiner is calling Zidane his comrade. That big oaf. Everyone's had room to grow into the person who would push on into the last act of the story. All of them representing a different struggle in the definition of their own identity. Vulnerability, loyalty, loneliness, yearning, curiosity, distrust, family, belonging. This stability is one of the hints to let you let off the gas pedal a little bit. As these arcs move from boil to simmer, the player is given the classic JRPG endgame reward: freedom. The world and its treasures, the mechanics and the characters, all are as open as they'll ever be. You can hold this note right at the precipice of the greatest challenge for as long as you want. Despite cataclysmic doom never being more present or urgent than now, don't worry. For the seasoned JRPG fan, it really is about the journey, so what's the rush? Why not just hang out here a little longer? I mean, there's all of those treasure hunts to track down. I only need a few more of those astrology coins for the Magnet mystery isn't going to solve itself. I really want to teach Vivi the 2x reflect Gotta find skill. All those friendly monster Dagger quests. Hasn't learned all of her summons yet. Better catch some more frogs. If I get a few more levels, maybe I can beat Ozma this time. If you grind all the way to level 99, save your game in the last slot on the memory card, ride the golden chocobo into the middle of the ocean between the 4 continents, and then feed it 10 hot peppers, Aerith comes back. The game lets me relax into a comfortable groove under the darkened sky. And maybe I'll never bother seeing the end. That would mean I'd have to stop hanging out with my friends. Why would you choose to end it and have to say goodbye? When we're as ready as we're gonna get, we can face the final part of the game. Kuja's up to some shit since his tantrum on Terra. The world has again been darkened by mist. Massive roots burst from the ground on every continent. At the Ifa tree, there's now this glowing portal in the sky. Obviously, we gotta get back there. And with the full force of every airship at our back, we cross through into Memoria. Get it? Yeah, you get it, right? It's a dimension constructed entirely out of the memories of all living beings. It's a merging of every civilization, every era, into one swirling mass of impossible architecture and space. We see visions from our own past melding with the history of the world and life itself. It all spirals into abstractions as we go deeper, tracing a path to the source. The source being the crystal, the engine where all life flows from and back to, the beginning of everything. And right there, at the very heart of it all, Kuja. In my adolescence and early teens, some of my most clear and fond feeling memories of playing games were these sprawling television season-length communal journeys through whatever JRPGs I, my sister, and her friends could get our hands on. They were all single-player games, but we treated them like a group activity. Part book club, part audience participation. There would be one person with the controller and the other with their nose in a strategy guide or a printed out game fact. We'd pass it around for hours to grind out levels or just sit in the same room and listen to the music like it was the radio. Do you kids know what the radio is? Like one of those 10-hour-long looping YouTube videos. JRPG best tracks compilation to chill/study/sleep to. There was no multiplayer, but these games were a huge part of how I socialized through media. Even when the game was off, we could dig through nascent forums for 240p videos of the game's CGI cutscenes edited into extremely embarrassing extremely good music videos. By the time I was in college, I had almost no JRPGs holding that space. Instead, I occupied the lobby of my too expensive apartment building to play through the campaign for Halo Reach with my best guy friend, finishing the entire game in one sitting, wordless for the duration except for brief mystery science theateristic quips at the end of each mission. Neither of these experiences are better than the other. I treasure that experience of shotgunning Halo Reach like it's a piece of fine art in the museum of my mind, only that it exemplifies the shift in how I engaged with games and what I sought out. Through codified multiplayer, I played games with other people more technically, but less emotionally. We didn't inhabit them. Games were lobbies and sandboxes, and I felt them less as places to be. Even in describing it, it feels like I'm just describing the facts of life. You get older, your days get shorter, your life seems less like an open field to play in, but a series of predictable, prescribed boxes that you cycle through. We're all growing old. Who has the time? I think it's interesting how much the resistance to older games comes back to time. They're too slow. They're too long. They waste your time. Well, everything's a waste of time if you don't want to be doing it. When we were young, we didn't have to prioritize how to spend our time around these other demands put on us. That was the best time to love a JRPG, when their shape fit into ours like a puzzle. 25 years later, even when I have the chance to play one, my relationship to that time has changed. And so my relationship to what I get out of it has also changed. But, the games did change too. They sure look different, don't they? You want to talk about graphics for a bit? Let's talk about graphics. If you've been looking at the screen, I do not have to tell you that Final Fantasy IX is hot. These are some hot graphics. Damn. But would you believe it if I told you that Final Fantasy games can look better than this? They don't. It's funny, if someone had asked me back in 2000 to predict what JRPGs would be like in 25 years, I would have guessed we'd have fully realized 3D worlds, excessively detailed cities and dungeons, Hollywood-grade CGI cutscenes. And, a lot of that did come to pass, if only in pieces. I expected JRPGs as I knew them, but more and better looking. That was the imagination of a 10-year-old. That things were advancing so clearly and quickly. What we had then seemed like it was just an early draft of a coming masterpiece. I didn't know how good we really had it. Listen, okay, all of this is subjective. This, most of all. And yeah, big surprise. Some guy wants to tell you that games from his childhood actually look great. But are you really going to tell me that these are not the best guys? You are allowed to have an opinion here that is different from mine. Legally, I can't stop you. If you wanted to say that this is somehow superior, or maybe this one, or this thing, or whatever's going on here. I don't know. Actually, looking at these is starting to make me sad in real life. That's between you and your God, and I'm not about to wrestle with the irrational formative attachments of another person's mind. But I'm doing my best to restrain the part of me that just wants to shout, "Look!" and leave it at that. It's peak. Even trying to explain why feels like underselling it. What can I say that your eyes aren't telling you already? We know it looks good. What really impresses me about it is how well it all holds together, and through that harmony makes the world feel genuine in a way that the series hasn't managed since. Even within their limitations, they made the right choices at every intersection to prioritize a holistic image. Random NPCs around the world just show off this wide diversity of cultures, nationality, age, and class. Every monster you run into feels like it's part of the same textbook of ideas. They feel like they're from someplace, which makes the places you go to feel distinct and alive. As soon as the Final Fantasy series transitioned into its 3D era, the game struggled to apply this technology to make their games as visually cohesive as they had been when everything was rendered in the same blocky pixels. Now there's 2D backgrounds, wide open maps, 3D character models, CGI movies. With 9, they'd refined it enough, practiced enough to find a blend that was just right. This was the sweet spot. As technology advanced, that smooth blend started to separate, filled with awkward gaps and seams that just make 9 even more impressive to me. It goes beyond how they look, it's also the way they act. And I mean act. Their performances. These games are story-focused experiences. With all this story everywhere, you spend a lot of time watching characters act it out without needing much from you. So it helps that 9 has some of the best acting in any JRPG I've played. It's worth noting that 9 was the last Final Fantasy game released on the PS1, and going forward the series would include voice acting. And I want to be delicate in the way I talk about this because the discourse around voice acting in JRPGs is so entangled with reheated hyperbole from gaming's dumbest, most xenophobic era. So I'm not going to play a bunch of out-of-context clips of quote-unquote hilariously bad acting. You will get no tituslaugh.mp4 from me. We are owed a better class of discourse on the topic of video game voice acting for localized Japanese games in particular. But I will not be the one to make that happen, because I don't really like them very much. 9 benefits from being born on this side of the production value arms race, and it's not that I think the voice acting would be so bad it would ruin it. It's that even if the voice acting was amazing, it wouldn't do anything to improve the performances in the game. I believe it has some of the best performances in a JRPG because this is the performance. For a decade, Final Fantasy games relied on blocking and pantomime to perform their story sequences. Even when pre-rendered CGI scenes were added to the toolbox, the vast majority was still acted out with simple animation loops stitched together with a corresponding text box. And all of those years of the artists at Square slowly honing their craft paid off with an incredible showcase of what can be accomplished within these limitations. Each time I've revisited this game, it's become increasingly ridiculous how I've never seen anyone crediting the character animation in it. Sure, people complimented it as an especially good-looking PS1 game at the time, but as a feat of game animation in the genre, it's a short list of games that can pull off what it did. Seriously, the amount of animation variety for each character is kind of staggering, and within that variety there's a deliberateness to its craft that has scarce few peers to this day. In games with bigger budgets and fidelity, these artists knew how to be clever with limited animation. In earlier games, the act of adding even one sprite to a character sheet was a big deal, and they treat each character here with a similar efficiency and frugality in mind. Especially in the main cast, so much personality is packed into every action they do, each with their own unique take on yelling, surprised, scared, pondering, pratfalling, using the lessons learned from the 3D frontiers of 7 and 8, now with a scale of animation diversity, appeal, and clarity in a class of its own. It's this kind of creative, thoughtful artistry that I'm referring to when I call it the peak of the genre. Compared to later games with models rendered in HD, all realistically proportioned, moving around fully 3D spaces, you see things you don't want to. Even with millions more dollars to animate and render, the improvements just make the flaws harder to ignore. Put these lavishly designed and cinematic performances of the main cast members next to the second class characters, and the gulf of the uncanny becomes a Mariana Trench, swimming with plastic action figures awkwardly gesticulating with no specific life or emotion. Is this actually technically competitive to the animation work being done in modern games? No! Come on! But are they all that different? Not really. And just in terms of pure animation appeal, honestly, I think this feels worse. Both because of the high fidelity character models clashing with these canned animations, and also because we're frequently seeing those same models animated much more expressively, often in the same scene. The result is something that feels shaggy, and with all of these stray distractions pulling me out of the world. What I want from a JRPG is to believe in its world. This kind of verisimilitude that's different from realism. In fact, every game has its own version of verisimilitude, and each game's graphics are a tool in service of that, to work with the other elements of its design to make the overall experience feel true. You can increase fidelity while losing believability if your presentation conflicts with its design. The design of 9 is in perfect sync with its presentation. The foundations of its game design, the story, the battles, the exploration, even its menuing, are questions the visual design is answering. Which sounds like it would produce something that feels utilitarian, but it actually means that all of this beautiful art and creativity doesn't take you out of the world. A lifetime ago, I mentioned JRPG Towns as this signature mix of mechanics and narrative design. And a big part of why that works is that the presentation perfectly serves its function in a way that slips them into the space of believability. Ironically, the more it relies on game logic and not reality, the more real it feels. Because a town in a JRPG isn't a town, right? You can't just live there, just hang out in those grassy fields, embracing the simple life, doing honest work, away from all your troubles. Seems nice. Just look at everyone. Be it in the moment. Not a phone in sight. If you design it like it's real, all the things it needs to do, all that game stuff, clashes and makes it feel fake. But if you start from the idea it should work as a video game town and then make that engaging, I don't question it. My mind recognizes it as town. How do you visualize this space so that it feels like more than just what it is? A bunch of menus and story triggers you have to walk around to? Well, make the layout unique, but not excessive. I need to find the shops, but they shouldn't be in the same place as the last town, and spread things out. So I have to explore and familiarize myself before I get what I came for. I need to find someone or some room to move the story along, so fill the space with interesting characters. Let me interact with all of them. Any room I walk into can tell a story. Anybody I talk to is an opportunity to color in the world and connect pieces together. And music. You know what real towns don't have? Theme songs. But a good tune is probably the most effective way to make a place in a game feel specific and memorable. You don't need realism to pull this off. If anything, the higher fidelity, the harder it is to make even simple things credible. 9 isn't held back by its graphics. Everything about the presentation creates a very particular kind of verisimilitude. They create an image, a feeling that sticks in your memory and outlives the limits of the experience itself. Graphics are not some problem to be solved. That's easier to see now that the landscape of notable game releases spans from lo-fi pixel art to $300 million experiments in rendering the pores on Troy Baker's face. While games have been lavished with so many realistic details granted by bigger and better processing power, I don't think we've moved that far in terms of the believability of the world. We've done amazing things with polygon counts, but in response, the games feel alternately stifling and empty, sometimes both at once. Uncanny worlds filled with uncanny people. For JRPGs in particular, better graphics have been a curse that demands these huge worlds shrink down to what can be reasonably designed for a fidelity that will never feel as real as the ones we imagined between the scan lines. Art is abstraction. It's incomplete by design. You're always choosing what to show and what not to show. That's how it communicates. But even in what is there, there's ambiguity, the necessity for the audience to interpret it. Incompleteness invites you into the art, and in the gaps between is where your relationship to it flourishes and becomes personal. Everything is so rendered, everything is so in focus, everything is so complete. When every line is voiced and motion captured and rendered in 4K, it doesn't leave your mind any room to imagine and interact with the illusion the art presents. I hate talking about how games look, good or bad, in isolation from what they're doing with that look. A game's presentation should support the rest of it, just like how your game can have good music in it, but still have a bad soundtrack because it's bad for the experience it wants you to have. I don't think the PS1 was simply the best way to render a JRPG. I think it's more that it never needed to look any better than this to do what they excelled at. As more was added in and old parts were put away to make room, JRPGs after 9 started to lose me. It became harder and harder for me to feel connected to their characters, their stories, and especially the world itself. So many elements of the presentation would snag and unspool into a limp and shapeless collection of perfectly fine individual elements, but not a whole one. I still remember how I felt when I first saw the cover for The Art of Final Fantasy IX. For decades after, this image has stuck with me, wedged itself into some part of my brain. This drawing of what I assumed at the time was a white-haired dagger, but to me now is clearly just a sketch not fully colored in, impressed me with a gnawing curiosity for more. I honestly still love flipping through this book, even though it's barely more than a loose collection of concept art. I get a thrill even now from looking at these intricate designs and marvel at how well they translate it into the game. It touches on a raw nerve in the corner of my mind dedicated to this memory, like experiencing it all for the first time again. It's kinda surreal to see the perfection usually reserved for rose tinting made real. Memory is usually a mirage. Being able to walk right up to it and touch it rattles me. Look, I get it. I'm not being an idiot on purpose. There's a lot of reasons why Square Enix in current year isn't going to release a mainline Final Fantasy sequel that looks or plays like a PS1 game or even a PS2 game. I will admit that it wouldn't even make much sense for them to do so. Despite all their successes, by the late 90s, the JRPG was still only nascently breaking into popular culture. Bringing more people in would mean wooing them with more expensive graphics, characters who speak with voices and not just text boxes, and faster, cooler action. 9 is not exempt from that arc. It was part of the Hollywoodification of Final Fantasy, at least from a presentation standpoint. So I can understand the drive to draw more people in from the sidelines, but this also overlooks that games like this brought me in, and the games that would follow left me out. There was and is a specific merit to this formula, virtues that it expresses because of how it looks and sounds and feels when it all stirs together. Playing this, appreciating the craft and beauty of it, you could imagine the possibilities from another 100 games in this style. But instead, things were about to change. After years of tinkering with the formula, either by trying to fit this abundant game design suite into exponentially more expensive development standards, or by reacting to shifts in the popularity of that formula to certain demographics, the shape of JRPGs became tarnished and contorted from its prime. The genre started to reek of shame and desperation. The more it tried to dress to appeal to the mainstream, the harsher it was critiqued for any remaining traits of its old design. By the 2010s, there wasn't much left of the JRPG golden age. Final Fantasy was putting out overbaked and divisive reinventions that barely held a whisper of the cultural cachet they previously boasted. Old brand names were demoted to niche budget titles, siloed in handheld platforms or mobile, and almost no one was making any money. Now, it's not like good JRPGs just vanished overnight. The 2000s were full of a whole cast of usual suspects in the best JRPGs of all time discussions. Tales of Symphonia, Mother 3, Golden Sun, Dark Cloud, Persona 3 and 4, Dragon Quest VIII, Paper Mario, The Thousand Year Door. I see you, desperate GameCube owners. Even the next couple of Final Fantasy games were pretty neat. The difference is, a good one used to excite people other than just card-holding members of the Japan Club. And it was only getting worse. The world was unkind to JRPGs for a while there. Engaging with any of the published or not criticism of the time shows the loudest voices recycling shallow, thoughtless derision, seemingly starting from the conclusion that traditional JRPG design isn't fun. Game design tilted towards speed, brevity, linearity, and empowerment. There wasn't as much appetite for games that wanted you to be patient and inhabit a world curiously. But the games themselves weren't entirely blameless either. These were not my favorite examples of their kind. Back in their prime, JRPGs were consistently tossing new ideas into the formula, experimenting with new gameplay styles and mechanics, seeing what could fit in there before the seams ripped. Much of that experimentation would lead to the most interesting and lasting franchises, inventing subgenres for themselves. But as the page turned, invention stagnated. Fewer games made by fewer studios, less popular and less self-assured, calcifying into a critical consensus that has hung around to today. Even as the genre has seemingly recovered some of its shine lately, the invasive mold of dismissal lingers in the corners, coming out in the way that a compliment for a newer game will thoughtlessly dig at the genre's old tropes. Or in more destructive ways, with re-releases and remasters being obligated to bear insulting mods that inherently apologize for their design. The genre has existed so long in this state of indefinite probation. We've seen some of the greatest games of their generations be humiliated by a bunch of kids wearing Siskel and Ebert Halloween masks, writing top 10 lists ranking their favorite commercials. I need to vent a particular frustration of mine about the condescending way people talk about JRPGs that is reflective of how shallow takes can become a cliche that grows into the dominant narrative about a whole genre. The most tedious of those cliches is that these games all end with you using the power of friendship to kill God, and that is somehow bad or ridiculous or otherwise so common that it makes us rightfully roll our eyes. First of all, shut up. Second, I don't think you've played any JRPGs before because it's not a thing. I mean it. Name 5 JRPGs where you kill God. Let's just look at the Final Fantasy series, the only series that North Americans are even aware of. We have a time-traveling knight, an evil emperor, a manifestation of malice, an evil tree, a superpowered clown. It's not until Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII, the second of the Final Fantasy XIII spin-offs with the worst name, that you actually genuinely kill God with some emotional support from your friends. And no one even played that game, so I know you're not thinking of that one. What this is actually about is the final confrontation tends to be with a being so powerful in the scale of the world we've come to know that they are effectively godlike. Lots of world-ending, reality-bending type guys that seem impossible to overcome. Ultimate power and all that. Certainly a big step up from punching goblins outside of your hometown. But I'm sorry, is that not the joy of an RPG? The fantasy of it all? To raise yourself from the lowest rung to eventually overcome the greatest threats facing the world? The power curve of the experience swings upward and the scale of the drama expands with it. Would you rather be fighting a level 99 rat in the final hours? Or do we expect more imagination from our stories? And story is key here, because with such a narrative-focused experience, deciding on an ending goes beyond being challenging and being cool. At their best, there's an effort to tie the mechanical climax into the themes. The conflict with God at the end is not a non sequitur. When used intentionally, it's a natural endpoint to where the escalating stakes of power meet the existentialism and struggle for meaning that's so common in JRPG stories. Like, oh no, I'm sorry my story about struggling against systems of will and power in a world that seem inescapably vast and entrenched into the nature of life itself ends with facing down a manifestation of that concept with the collective might of the bonds we share with one another. What seems to be happening is that people are getting to the end of these games and finding that they're often not about resolving the conflicts of one army or nation or quest of vengeance, and are caught off guard by the choice to veer thematic rather than literal. But if you choose to read the purpose of the final battle as a thematic resolution and not a literal one, the choice makes perfect sense. For example, as we defeat Kuja with nothing left to lose, he flips the table and attempts to destroy the engine of all life, the crystal. Zidane awakens, stranded with his friends at the deepest layer of this dimension. A voice speaks to us. This is Necron, a callous adjudicator who's there to zero out all existence. Kuja's tantrum, his fear of his own end, has given Necron all the proof it needed that, in fact, all life yearns for the void so it can be rid of this fear. Every selfish act Kuja made was motivated by fear and desperation. People will all eventually succumb to fear when faced with the reality of an uncaring universe, where there is no meaning, just suffering. Zidane rejects this. No, we give life meaning. Our memories, our pain, our joy, our friends, our death, all of it has value. The will to live and experience life is reason enough to keep existing. Here is the crux of all of our characters' journeys. Each of them have, in their own way, faced powerlessness, loneliness, meaninglessness, hungriness, and through confronting their fears, found their own reasons to be. It's through the bonds they have with each other that they have the purpose to stare down the existential horrors of the universe. When there are no illusions left and life offers no answers, we can become despair or define our own meaning. This story chooses memory as the foundation of life's meaning, how we can reject fear and see beyond ourselves. Even in death, our memories will live on inside others. We can be remembered. We can be the ones who remember. This is what it means to not be alone. These are the kinds of stories JRPGs are built to tell. These existential questions aren't a result of a lack of imagination. It's a recognition of what themes thrive in this soil. Game stories tend to be about what the game design is about, even if by accident. The focus on characters, the scale of the world, the sprawling drama, the conditions for this were set up from the start. Still, there is a classic simplicity to the way 9 tells it. The endearing hopefulness of it seemed a bit old-fashioned against the turning millennium and the ways that games would change with it. But we're done playing now. We just have to watch this story end. Before that nebulous space collapses, everyone is blinked to safety outside the Ifa tree, which is going nuts now. Roots whipping around, seething with chaos. Just as they're all getting aboard an airship to rest off the adventure someplace else, Zidane puts together who it was who saved them. And now he's got one last heroic act before the curtain closes. He says goodbye to Dagger. She thanks him for everything, and asks him to promise to come back. And she knows he won't. Zidane finds Kuja beneath the tree, thanks him. It's not so much redemption, just regrets. But even he's not alone at the end. Time passes. Life has looped back around to where we began, another play in Alexandria. Things are not exactly the same. We skip around seeing the world through everyone's eyes again, but not everyone. In his absence, Vivi's words are here, and his fond memories of what they did while they were together. We accomplished a lot, and part of it was learning that some goodbyes are unavoidable, and some endings aren't as permanent as they seem.
I've been thinking a lot about why I remember Final Fantasy IX. I've been thinking about that question for longer than anyone involved spent making the game. I've been remembering the game for twice as long as the name Final Fantasy existed when 9 came out. It all has me thinking about memory. Working on this project, I've gone back to play so many games from this particular point in my development, adolescence through high school, just dozens of JRPGs, even the ones that I had no past experience with. I still got this hit off of them. It was so comforting to crack open a game from 1999 and feel this warm blanket embrace me. I started to miss games that were new to me while I was playing them, imagining a younger version of me that had grown decades of a different nostalgia.
And it wasn't all roses either. I pricked myself on plenty of flaws. Coming back to some familiar places showed cracks I didn't see before. For all the risky creative gambles that paid off, at least as many were frustrating or dull. Yet, whatever I felt about them, the paths of their successes and failures always brought me back to 9. Everything reminded me of how good this game makes me feel. They made me miss all of the games like 9 that never got made. I thought 9 was special at the start, but I didn't realize how much more special it would seem after comparing it to every other game in its orbit. Which is normal, right? odds are your favorite game came out by the time you were in high school, assuming you were gaming. And if not your favorite, one that you love. It's a potent time for those kinds of lasting sentiments. Music, movies, friendships, places. And time is a big part of that. Time never feels the way it does when you were a kid, which matters a lot when we're talking about JRPGs. They're long games. They really thrive in an environment where your relationship to time feels abundant. When I was younger, my life had plenty of time for Final Fantasy IX. Now that I'm older, I make time for it. I found that this is a game that burrows in deeper the older I get, because it happens to be about wishing you had more time, about remembering how things used to be. The lesson about letting go has taken me growing up to understand it. Its story may be simple, but it's not simplistic. It uses its well-worn formula to talk honestly about old wisdom. In its conventions, I see its creators wrestling with legacy and regret. It can be empowering to say that we alone give our lives meaning, but isn't that also scary? That you could mess it up, choose badly, have regrets, and only have yourself to blame? Do we fear death, or do we fear a meaningless life? How do I know what kind of life I'll have wanted to live in 10 years? If no one can tell you the kind of life you should live that will make you happy, then what will we do when we eventually see the score and realize we can't go back? Everyone loves Vivi because he's an adorable little baby boy, cutie pie, lemon-eyed, wobbly sweetheart, but also because he represents what we hope we would do in that position. We're all in the waiting room, biding our time until our number is pulled, and unfair as it is, he accepts it with grace. And then there's Kuja. I can't say I see much of myself in most of the colorful supervillains in other games in the series, but Kuja's a different kind. His weaknesses look like my weaknesses, that in me exists a selfish urge to treat my life as more important than others, even if I know it means making the world worse in the process. I'm afraid I don't matter. I'm afraid to die. I know. It's just a game. I thought I knew what I was aiming for when I started this. I really wanted to make the definitive case that Final Fantasy IX is the peak of an underappreciated and misunderstood genre. But the more I sat with the pieces I was assembling, the harder it was to see the line between analysis and nostalgia. And eventually I just ended up writing about myself, so, like most video essays. But say in the process, I did make the case. You're convinced. What happens now? Do we all suddenly start making more games in the spirit of this one? I don't think we're really starving for retro gaming trends at the moment. If I really dug into the indie game releases of any given year, there'd be plenty waiting for me. Throwbacks and spiritual successors are a packed market. And bless their little hearts, but not one I've tried has done it for me. Excuse my brush's broadness, but most of them just end up feeling like kids dressing up in their parents' clothes, wobbling around in too big shoes and baggy suits. So much play acting and not enough being. Nothing sticks to me half as well as the grab bag of actually old games I tried fresh in current year. You can't fool me. We do not have Chrono Trigger at home. And for a while, each time another throwback caught my attention but failed to score, I would think, you don't get what made your inspiration so special. If they just focused on the right parts, the stuff that mattered, we could have the good JRPGs again. I could have more of what I was missing. That's the trap nostalgia gets you with. Stuck trying to find a way back into a feeling that exists as a memory, until you're dismantling your favorite game, looking for an answer in the pieces to what the whole means. What made it special is more than all of my notes and charts and formulas. I wanted to quantify what makes JRPGs great. And I learned a lot. I don't think I enjoy any of these games a speck less than I did before I brought math into it. But even if studying paintings can teach you plenty about their craft, it doesn't get you any closer to understanding why they're art. There's no formula for that part. You can't just copy a masterpiece to make a masterpiece. I haven't wanted to use the dreaded R word in regards to 9, despite how you can't engage with its fandom for long without it coming up. When is someone going to remake Final Fantasy IX? My biggest fear about putting this out on the anniversary of the 25th year is that it's such a plausible day to announce a remake, so that me speaking on its hypothetical qualities sets me up for a very public last crusading of my takes, so I'll not be wasteful. If you can't tell how I would feel about such a remake regardless of its execution, I assume you somehow skipped the majority of this video. Hello there, stranger. Are you lost? Ironically, the thirst for a real remake of 9 is what makes me sure that it's not needed. Looking at how people talk about it to this day, people can't contain their love for this game. All of this passion overflows into wanting more of it. And if you can't ask for a sequel, you ask for a remake. But I still see people discovering this game we already have and becoming born-again fans. Nothing seems to be stopping me or anyone else from appreciating this game in current year. It's not broken, poorly translated, or marked by missed potential. If you love it enough to cry for a remake, then you have everything you need. This is a closed loop. There's nothing to fix. It already made you feel all of those things. While I have no appetite for it and maybe find the prospect misguided and repellent, I sympathize. I do. Even a happy ending is an ending. If you can't go back, where do you go? Near the end of the game, as we're walking through Memoria, the party ends up in a series of dreamlike dioramas. At first, these scenes are places we've been, things we've experienced firsthand. But then we're shown things we didn't witness. We're told that memories aren't limited to a singular person or experience. They're interconnected, shared between every being. Every child who has a parent, who has a parent, who has a parent, all life derived from a unified source that links us together. It's frankly a scene that I didn't really understand well when I first played the game. It felt a bit tacked on, just tossing in the concept of intergenerational memory right here at the end. To 10-year-old me, it seemed like another bit of fantasy exposition that didn't matter to the story that I cared about. It was only years later that I could see it for what it was, the thing that directly ties the game itself into its message. This game is the creators giving you a memory, an experience that will be your own. But it's also made out of their memories, their love of stories like this. Stories which in turn were made by people who also were shaped the same way. It's the game at its most bluntly metatextual, drawing our attention to why a game about the power of memory would revel in its own legacy. If the point of this place, the cradle of creation for the world of Final Fantasy IX, assembling into a swirling mass of references of the past, was not apparent yet, it should be now. Why, in a game where the creators are openly recognizing the next generation on the horizon, they would make explicit how it fits into the chain of everything that came before. That the chain continues, not through Final Fantasy X, but through whoever experienced it and felt something and was inspired by it. This is us, playing Final Fantasy IX. This story is someone else's story, but now it's ours too. This is what art has the power to do, to let us share our memories with other people, to let them feel the things we felt, to open ourselves to other people's experiences and be shaped by them, just like they were. And that act of sharing transforms it from something old into something new. This is how memories live on. As reluctant as I am to confidently declare something as the artist's intent, or even give that intent priority, the dismissive attitude that assumes no meaning could have been intended worries me more. It's possible all these connections are just overeager projection. When asked, the creators behind 9 will often say that the game was intended as a celebration of the series up to that point, and that they wanted players to experience a fun and classic fantasy adventure. So maybe it is that simple, and there's no conscious effort to tie this retrospective on the series to reflections on how our own stories will come to an end. Endings, after all, are defined in hindsight. We're usually not lucky enough to know which adventure is our last until it's already behind us. So yeah, my reading isn't cited in any wiki anywhere. I could be reading too much into it. But, sue me, at least I'm reading. And, intended or not, I feel safe in saying that the creators were people very familiar with these lessons from their own lived experiences, of looking back on parts of their lives at closed doors, wishing some stories hadn't ended before they were ready, wishing they could go back. Because that happy pain is something we've all felt. And they made art that embodies that longing beautifully, filled with dreams of all the things we'd do if only we had more time. Can we accept life and all the endings it has in store? Are we doomed to resent change, clinging to each impermanent thing until it all fades away? Remaking it, unmaking it. As I see it, the game and its creators come firmly down on the side of cherishing the past, but not living in it. We can let our memories age without forgetting them. Because nostalgia isn't the memory, it's the pain. The pain of trying to exist in two moments at once. Then and now. It's in being able to look back on it that gives the past its value. So, knowing that, do I still think we haven't shown these old JRPGs enough love? Fucking yes, obviously. If anything, I'm more mad about it now than when I started. The absence of nostalgia is not less love, and the marketing brain mindset that turns us away from the wisdom of older game design should be fought like a cancer. Final Fantasy IX is still a timeless example of knowing what you're good at and embracing the strength of a genre. And what a genre! Just looking at the increasingly corporate, homogenized, risk-averse state of mainstream game design, I crave for the weird, generous, experimental messes that this era of JRPGs often were. Maybe one would mix in Zelda-like action. Maybe one has you collect and raise monsters. Maybe one is also kind of a dating simulator. They would take the fundamentals and remix them with love, not embarrassment. There was so much life and possibility. Everyone was still figuring out what they were capable of. I can't say for sure where the blame lies for how things changed for the JRPG genre, what was cause and what was effect, but I saw the souring discourse. All these things that made them cool were turned into targets on their back. Too wordy, too girly, too Japanese. And so scolded, so many of these parts were discarded, filed down until they looked more like other games. I am so tired of those games. It's why coming back to this era of game design has given me so much joy. Finding new examples of what they don't make them like anymore. All these stories, worlds, mechanics, characters, and art that still shine like new. And it will always be wrong that we let the lamest voices in the culture shame it into the closet. But we can't undo that now. What do I really want? For so long, I thought I wanted another game like this to exist, to salve the yearning for there to be more Final Fantasy IX. I thought, how could a game this wonderful not have spawned ranks of imitators? I was frustrated that instead of following its accomplishments, JRPGs seemed to pivot away to focus on other ideas, before floundering and fading. The imagined world where this game design was treasured and iterated on was replaced with one where JRPG became a shameful word. And when nostalgia for the genre started to rekindle, it never seemed to see what I saw as the pieces worth remembering. Where was the memory of the game I loved? But in the process of returning to it again and again over decades of my life, and then writing this, and then thinking about this game and its genre for longer and harder than anyone should have, I have come to a different feeling. I think we actually have enough Final Fantasy IX. Everything it needed to say, it did. Never mind whether anyone making it knew this was an ending. I can't imagine one more fitting than this. Do you realize how rare that is? Instead of trotting out the same routine until it's been drained of all spark and appeal, we just end on a high. Which, as someone who loves this game in particular, is probably the best I could hope for. Even if the demand was there, if enough people saw in it what I see, I don't think you can separate how it succeeds from its place in history, because all of the factors, culturally, economically, personally, that made it such a masterpiece could never and would never exist again. You don't need to have been there to get it, but it had to be there. Not even getting the boys back together with a shipping container of Bill Gates' money could will another game like it into being. And Lost Odyssey really tried. I believe this because as much as I go on about the unfair reputation that JRPGs have endured, this phenomenon is not exactly as unique as I've made it out to be. Sure, there's many classic games that have managed to maintain a high regard and justify their design long after their time is gone, but most of them don't get that treatment. The list of games that exist like an amputation that give the phantom sensation of a reality where we made more of that is long and agonizing. And in the rare instances where the dimensions overlap and we see something slip through, what we get is never just more of that. Instead, it shares the thing that the original had that no imitation can offer. It's a step forward. All the more reason we should try to look back clearly. We don't need to turn back the clock and rewrite history. History is all around us, waiting for us to appreciate it, to learn from it. The industry around games is already so eager to remember nothing, to learn nothing. More than ever, it races to burn generations of talent, old and new, for fractions of a percentage point of shareholder value. We can't expect them to remember it for us. If anything I've said made you curious to try out a game you thought was too old or a genre you assumed wasn't for you, good! I think it's so important that beyond just preservation, it's necessary to also experience them, to think about them and feel about them. We're part of the record that carries them forward. Play older games, play weirder games, play worse games. Why did they stop making games like this is such a universal feeling. I'd guess that every game is somebody's Final Fantasy IX. In the comments of trailers for games from every generation and every genre is someone expressing that this was as good as it ever got. That in that experience was something irreplaceable, and they don't make them like that anymore. Let's extend the understanding I've wanted for JRPGs to all kinds of games. Maybe your favorite game is Buck Bumble for the Nintendo 64. Maybe your favorite game is Odin Sphere for the PS2. Genji, Dawn of the Samurai, Jeanne d'Arc, Custom Robo, Crusader of Senti, Shining Force 3, Binary Domain. Maybe your favorite game is one nobody talks about. Maybe I've never heard of it. Maybe it kind of sucks. Maybe that's why you love it. I'm glad you're there to remember it. And if I ever get around to playing it, I'll give it the respect to not turn off the random battles.
They don't make anything like they did before. It's kind of how this whole thing works. Maybe some ideas are more fondly remembered than others. Maybe you don't know anyone who loves the thing as much as you love it in the way you think it deserves to be loved. You probably don't. Maybe that's enough. You can love it enough for everyone. And that love can be what makes the thing that someone else loves. Maybe that thing is you. They don't make games like Final Fantasy IX anymore. And even if they try, they can't make the game that I love again. But that love is part of me now. And I'm here. We don't have to go back. This can be enough.